All right, good morning. We'll go ahead and get started. It's a few minutes before 9, but we'll start anyway. Another packed class, so that's good. I like it when everyone is here. I need a bigger classroom now. Either that or I need to start doing 2 classes. But last time I threatened to do 2 classes, no one showed up for the second class. I think I had 2 people, so I stopped doing that. But yeah, but we'll look at that. If it stays packed for the whole thing, maybe I'll think about doing that. All right, we're going over airport operations today. Did everyone who read the chapter and went over the stuff with Gold Seal? If you did it, okay. Any questions on what we're going to talk about today that I can get up on the board ahead of time? All right. Okay, so airport operations. We're going to talk about 2 kinds of airports. We have 2 kinds of airports. What are they? What are the 2 different types of airports? What do you think, Lizzie?
Towered and non-towered.
Towered and non-towered. That's the 2. So we're going to talk about towered versus non-towered airports, okay? All right, so what do we, and next week we're talking airspace, so I'm not going to get into this too much, but generally, there's one airspace that's not listed on here, that's airspace alpha, which is up high above 18,000 feet, and it has nothing to do with airports. But in the other 5 airspace classes, you could have airports, okay? These are all towered airports, so B, C, and D, airspace B, C, or Bravo, Charlie, and Delta are airspaces where airports with operating control towers exist. Okay, so we'll talk about procedures at those airports, primarily really focusing on Delta because that's the type of airport we have here as a Delta. There's some very slight differences in the operating procedures between the Delta and the Charlie and a Bravo. Very slight, and I'll go over them, but there's some differences in the way you communicate and the way you get in, the way you get out, stuff like that. And then you have non-towered airports where there is no tower, there is no one communicating, that you're not communicating with any specific entity, you're just communicating with anybody else that's in the area that happens to be listening on that frequency that might be around that airport or using that airport. So you're just communicating kind of in the blind, so to speak. I'll talk about processes for that. And then we're going to look at signage at airports, if the airport has any signs, right? And we'll wind indicators and all that kind of stuff. All right? All right, so airport data. Where do we get airport data? How do we know what runways an airport has, whether it's towered, whether it's non-towered? All of that kind of stuff. Where do we get that information? There's 4 primary places. The first place is, well, maybe not the first place, but aeronautical charts is one of them. So we're all familiar with what an aeronautical chart is, I hope. If not, I'll just show you one. We're going to be using them next week, but this is a Houston aeronautical chart sectional. So that's a sectional chart right there. All right, it's got all the airports on it and whatnot. And here's the other side of it. And there's the Gulf on that side of it. Okay, so aeronautical charts are published every 56 days. You have new one every 56 days. Okay, and the reason they're published so frequently is because things change. Airports come and go. Runways may disappear or reappear or whatever the case may be. Things change at these airports, and so we have to publish new charts to give us current data. Then we have chart supplements. The chart supplement is what we call the Green Book. Some of you may have seen that before, but it is a book that has all of the information. In fact, let me just fast forward to a slide here to show you real quick. Here's an example of the chart supplement for this airport. So New Braunfels Airport has all of the information, not just a little bit of the information, but all the information you would need to know about a particular airport, a particular public use airport. We'll get to this slide in a minute here again, but that's also published on a 56-day cycle, but not the same 56-day cycle. They overlap each other, and the reason for that is if a change to an airport, let's say, that can't be published on the sectional chart that you have currently comes out, they publish it in the chart supplement. And then the next time a chart is published, it goes on the chart. So they kind of overlap so that information is available someplace to you. If a change occurs and neither one of these has it in it, hasn't been published yet, it had interim between either of these publications, it goes out in a notice to airmen. So on notices to airmen, it would be published there. And you could get that information. And then lastly, if it's on none of these, let's say a taxiway is closed or a runway gets closed for something, maybe you're flying to an airport you haven't been to before and you've checked everything. You've got no NOTAMs about this airport and they only got one runway. And you get there and all of a sudden that runway's closed because an aircraft had a flat tire or something on it. Well, now it would come out on the ATIS. If it's a towered airport, it would come out on the ATIS. It would be noted on the ATIS as some type of a NOTAM. Okay? So this is generally how you get your airport data, your airport information right here. And who do you think's responsible for making sure you got airport information and data? Everybody sitting in this room right here. It's your responsibility. If you're flying, if it's an airport that you know you're going to use, you're intending to use it, then it's your responsibility to check all of that available information. Not only the weather like we talked about last week or the week before, but airports of intended use, runway lengths, and all of that kind of stuff. It's your responsibility to check. Okay, let's look at airport signs and markings real quick. Just like road signs, just like stop signs and yield signs and all that kind of stuff, we have signage that you'll find at airports. And the signage will be the same, just like a stop sign looks the same whether you're in California or Maine, okay? So will a hold short signage or any other type of signage. It'll look the same at airports. However, some airports won't have all the signage. Just because you have an airport doesn't mean you're going to have all of the signage that's available. So generally speaking, the bigger, busier the airport, the more likely it is to have most all of the different types of signage and markings and that kind of stuff that you would see. So something maybe similar to this, where you have a bunch of signs, a bunch of markings. I'll go over a few of these. I'm not going to go over all of them. This comes right out of, I think it's Addendum Charlie in the 808325. I think it's in the back. Comes right out of there. You can also get this information out of the AIM. It's either Chapter 4, Section 3, or Chapter 2, I forget which, but both of these deal with airport operations. One's, I think, communication, the other is signage. So it's your responsibility to understand these signs and what they mean. One advantage of working at an airport or learning to fly at an airport such as this, it's a towered airport. It's not a big airport, but it's relatively busy. And so we have a lot of these signs and markings. So you get the opportunity to see these signs and markings and are familiar with them. However, you won't see them all. Some signs that are even on here aren't at this airport. And then you may fly over to some place like Kingsbury where we do all our grass operations. How many of these signs you see over there? None of them. There's none. There are no signs, right? So depending on the airport, you may have some signs, you may not have signs. If they do have signs, they'll follow the format that you'll find in the AIM. So I'll go over a couple of the important ones here since we're working at a towered airport. Obviously, right off the bat, I want you to look at colors real quick because colors will tell you a lot. All right, if you see red, what does that mean? It means stop, right? If you see red, think stop, okay, unless you have permission to cross it, right? So anytime you see red, it means stop. Generally speaking, it means stop, all right? The other thing you'll see, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but a little bit more. Other thing you see as far as paint markings go, you have yellow paint markings, you have white paint markings. Where do you see white versus yellow at?
On the runway.
On the runway. So if you see white paint markings and you don't have permission to be on a runway, guess what? You're in a bad place. You better not see white. If you're not supposed to be on a runway and you see white, get off. Figure, what's going on, right? Yellow is always taxiway markings. White will always be runway markings. Okay. The yellow signs, black lettering with yellow background, or yellow lettering with black background, are directional in nature. Directional, or they tell you where you're at. So yellow on black is where you're at. That's one way to think about it. Yellow on black. If you see yellow letterings on black background, it tells you that's where you're at. So if you're taxiing along here and you see that, you know you're on Alpha. It tells you you're on Alpha. If you're facing here and you see that, you know you're on Alpha 2, as an example. If you see black on yellow, it's directional. So you could be taxiing here on Alpha, and if you're supposed to go to Alpha 2, you know that that's the next turn. Alpha 2 is the next turn. Okay, Alpha 1 right here. So those are directional. Paint, and that would be signs that you would see sticking up. You could see them also painted on pavement, but that's unlikely at smaller airports. You might see it at bigger airports. All right. These are hold shorts. You see these around here. For those of you that have trained, have started your training, you'll see these around here. So you've got a set of double solid lines and double dashed lines. All right. So just like when you're driving, if you're driving and let's say this is the 2 lanes that you're driving in, if you have a solid line and you're behind a slow car, can you pass that car legally? No. If you have a dash line, can you pass that car legally?
Yes.
Yeah. What if you have something like this and you're on this side? Can you pass?
No.
What if you're on this side?
You can.
Yes, right? So you cannot pass a solid line unless you have permission. If you have a dash line, pass it. Okay? So that's your hold short. If we're taxiing up right here and you're taxiing up to the solid side, you cannot cross that line unless you have permission to be on the runway. Runway begins right there. The runway begins right here at that first line. And any part of the airplane, like the spinner, the nose of the spinner crossing that line is a runway incursion. You're on a runway, you get in trouble for that. Can't have any part of the airplane cross that line until you have permission to be on the runway. If you landed and you're exiting, well, now you get to this line, what are you going to do? You're going to cross it and get every single inch of the airplane past the solid line. If a little tiny bit of it's sticking past that, you're on the runway. That's a runway incursion if you're not supposed to be there. Get off the runway. Okay. So those are hold short lines. Really important that you understand, especially at towered airports, that you cannot be on a runway without permission to be on a runway. You cannot cross a hold short line without being told or having clearance to do that. Okay. Okay. As far as taxiing goes around here, well, let's just take this one as an example. You can't really see the end of 1.5 over here, or 3.3 coming here. Maybe 1.8 starts out here somewhere, and 3.6 down here somewhere. If I were taxiing down Alpha, let's say I had a direction to get here to 1.5, and my instructions were to taxi to 1.5 via Alpha. Okay, if that's all I got, taxi 1.5 via Alpha, I can get on Alpha here, but I cannot cross 1836. Even though they say they could say 261 Romeo Alpha taxi to 1.5 via Alpha. That would be a legitimate clearance. Okay, if they said that 261 Romeo Alpha taxi to 1.5 via Alpha. What they didn't say, but what they implied was 261 Romeo Alpha taxi to 1.5 via Alpha and hold short of 1.8. If they do not give you a hold short, that's an implied absolute hold short. They don't have to say it. They don't have to say hold short. What they would have to say is cross. If they said 1 Romeo Alpha, taxi to 1.5 via Alpha, and cross 1.8, now I have a clearance to cross. Does that make sense? All right, so they might say hold short, they might not. If they don't say hold short, what did they say? Hold short. If they don't say hold short, they said hold short. Okay? Most of them are pretty good at saying hold short. But understand that if they miss that, if they get busy and they don't say hold short, they said hold short. They have to say cross, okay? And you need to read that back. And I'll say that right now. There's another advantage of learning to fly at an airport like this, at a towered airport. You're forced to use the radio. You're forced to learn how to talk on the radio. When I started flying at a little grass strip in Florida, I was scared to death at towered airports because I'm very comfortable at non-towered airports. But after I got my license, I went around and over and stayed away from towered airports. It wasn't until I started working on my instrument rating that I was forced into the ATC system. So the advantage of working at learning at an airport like this is you get comfortable. How many of you are just starting your training? Maybe you just got 1 or 2 lessons. Okay, how's the radio work for you? Is it scary?
Getting better.
It's getting better, yeah. But it's scary. When you first start, that's a thing that just kind of makes us nervous. But there's an advantage of flying here because you get comfortable with it pretty quick. The odd thing is now you're uncomfortable at non-towered airports. because you can talk to people, but you can't talk to nobody, you know, when you're just announcing. It's weird. All right, so from a communication standpoint, at a tower airport, you're going to get clearances. Okay, clearances will come in different ways. Sometimes they'll tell you, for instance, you're cleared to cross, or you're cleared to take off, or you're cleared to land. You'll get these clearances. Communication is really kind of a three-step process. Okay, so someone's gonna you will contact, let's say, the tower or ATC. The tower will respond to you, so you'll make contact. Okay, that's step one. They're going to respond. That's step two. And then you're going to regurgitate what they said to you. That's step three. So that's always the case when it's ATC type communication. It's one way, then back for confirmation. Always. Okay. You're going to request. They're going to give you direction. You're going to repeat the direction. Always, always. All right. At the tower airport here, a lot of times you'll hear a bunch of stuff. The tower personnel might give you a lot of information. But what you need to understand, and this is part of the confusion, part of the hard part about learning how to do this, is when you're responding, okay, let's say you make a request and they respond to that request, or they give you direction based on your request, and then you regurgitate or you confirm what they said. The confirmation that you need to give back is very simple. It's your clearances. Whatever they cleared you to do, that's what they want to hear. Okay? So an example might be you're at the end of 17. I hear this a lot. You're at the end of 17. And they say cleared, they'll say clear to cross 13 because you have to cross a runway to get to 17. So they have to give you a clearance to cross that runway before they can give you the clearance to take off. So then they say clear to cross 13, clear to take off 17. Wind's now 220 at 15, gusting to 20, caution birds at the end of the runway. That's a very common thing they might say. What do you have to respond? Clear to cross 13, clear to take off 17. That's it. The other information they're giving is good information. It's information you might want to know, and you may want to acknowledge the birds and the wind, but you don't have to. All you have to read back, remember this is the clearances, okay, at tower airport. Just read back the clearances. And if you don't, that presents a problem because now they have to call you back and say it again. And it's going to be back and forth until you read back the clearance. You have to read back the clearance, okay? That's a big important thing about communications at tower airports. Read back your clearances. We'll get into doing some of those here in a little bit. We'll practice in class. All right, as far as some other signage here, the red, you'll always find these signs. Well, not always, I shouldn't say that. But whenever you do see these signs, they are co-located with these hold shorts right here. So if you see this sign, it's co-located with this hold short. That's kind of nice because sometimes, especially, we're our eye level above the ground when we're taxiing these little small airplanes is, right here. So if you're looking 100 yards up you can't see the painting, you can't see the hold short, but you'll see the sign. And you know that the paint mark is right where the sign is at. So you kind of know where it's at before you get to it, okay? All right, this one, this is a little bit different. This is a hold short on the runway. So this is what's called a land and hold short operation, a lasso. All right, so we don't do lassos at this airport. But they are done, and you'll only find them at towered airports. They are done at towered airports. Those are there when you have intersecting runways, and the tower wants to take advantage of using both runways at the same time. So in this example, the tower here at this airport could be using runway 15 at the same time that they're using runway 18 in their intersecting runways. All right, so they have to have land and hold short, lasso, land and hold short operations. So typically in a situation like this, what would happen would be, let's say the wind's probably blowing, either there's no wind or it's very calm, or the wind's blowing kind of in this direction, where either of the runways would be applicable. You could use either runway. So a lot of times at busier airports, they'll use one runway for takeoff operations and one runway for landing operations. So then you might have a land and hold short thing going on. So let's say they're taking off 15 and landing 18. When you get a clearance to land, you own, once you have that clearance, you own the entire runway. Every bit of that pavement from the threshold right here, from that threshold to the other threshold down here for 1-3, all of that runway is yours. Nobody else's. So you can land on it and you can cross any crossing runway. You can roll right through any crossing runway you want to. When you get clearance to take off, same thing. You own when you have a clearance for a runway, you own every bit of it, whether it's to take off or to land. It's all yours, okay? When I was talking about taxiing, you can't cross a runway on a taxi, okay? You can't do that because you don't own the entire taxiway, right? You cannot cross a runway. The only time you can cross a runway without permission is if you're landing or taking off. Now you can have the permission to cross any crossing runway during the takeoff or landing operation. Unless there's a land and hold short operation in process. Okay, so in that case, let's say you've got aircraft taking off on 1-5 and landing on 1-8, and let's say I'm over here on the downwind, the left downwind for 1-8, come around and land. Now the tower could, if they have land and hold short operations going on, they could request me to land and hold short of 1-5, land 1-8, hold short 1-5. But they won't give me that. They won't say 124 Golf X-ray, clear to land 1-8, hold short 1-5. They won't do that. They will say 261 Romeo Alpha, are you able to land 1-8, hold short 1-5? And if I say yes, then they will give me that clearance. Now I only own it from the threshold to that right there. As long as I can land and hold short of that hold short line, they'll give me the clearance. Does that make sense? And that allows them to have somebody rolling and taking off at the same time that I'm landing right here. So you can see where not all airports are going to do this, especially at training airports. They don't like doing this very much at training airports. But those are land and hold short operations. And they have to request it. They won't just give it to you. And then you have to accept it, okay? If you're a student pilot, which everybody in this room is right now, if you're a student pilot, you are unable to accept a land and hold short, okay? You're unable to accept it. So the tower, you think the tower's gonna know you're a student pilot? Unless you tell them. Okay, so one of the things that what do I tell the people I've soloed? Did I solo you? Yeah. What did I tell the people that I soloed before you soloed? Anybody I solo anybody? Tell them you're a student pilot. If you're going to be soloing, then when you get on the radio, when you make that initial call, you should say whatever you're going to say, blah, 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 student pilot. You should let the tower, let ATC know you're a student pilot solo. If you do that, and you're operating at an airport that does land and hold short operations, guess what they're not going to ask you? They're not going to ask you to land and hold short because they know you can't accept it. They're not even going to give it to you. Not only that, they're going to hopefully kind of talk slower and kind of go easy on the communication, slow things down a little bit. Hopefully they'll do that. Sometimes they don't. All right. Okay, let's see if there's anything else on here that's I want to talk about as far as signage goes. Here, this one, this is also a hold short. This one here that looks like a ladder, that's a hold short also, but it's an ILS critical area hold short. So this is not one that you mandatorily have to stop at. So if you see a red ILS sign, that's also a hold short, but it's not one you have to stop at. Any of these other ones, if you don't have clearance, now this is different here. Unless you got to land and hold short, you can blow past that one because you're on the runway, okay? But otherwise you have to stop, or you have to at least make sure that you have clearance. And if you're taxiing along and you think you have clearance to cross, but you're not absolutely sure, you're just going to go ahead and cross? No, you're going to ask them, hey, I just want to verify, am I cleared to cross 1-8? I can tell you that ATC they would much rather you ask than them have to do the paperwork involved with a runway incursion. Okay, runway incursions are probably the biggest issue happening right now at airports with pilots and ATC, runway incursions. And runway incursions, what's a runway incursion? It's anytime a person, a vehicle, anything is on a runway that shouldn't be on a runway. That's a runway incursion. Okay.
What does ILS stand for?
So the ILS hold short is if you're in ILS IMC conditions, instrument meteorological conditions, and we're using an ILS approach, the aircraft, which is an instrument landing system approach. There's ground-based equipment and there's aircraft equipment that are talking to each other so that this aircraft is guided right down to the runway without visual reference. When you have an airport, when you have a runway that has an ILS, you will see, and you've probably seen these before, somewhere off the end of that runway, somewhere off over here, you'll see a little shack. You see like a little shed. That shed has the ILS equipment in it. Okay, and so that equipment is talking to the airplane, guiding it down to the runway. They make aircraft stop at a certain point so they don't get so close to this equipment that they interfere from the standpoint of interfering with that transmission that's going back and forth. So if they're doing ILS operations, they might have you hold short ILS critical. But everybody here right now is VFR pilot, so you're not going to be out there if they're doing IFR stuff. So you're not likely to hear it. Okay, but that's what that means. And then here's a hold short for an approach. I don't know of any airports around here, but I'm not that familiar with all the airports around here yet. But occasionally, if you have a taxiway, it doesn't cross the runway, but it's close enough to the threshold that they may not want you crossing that if there's an airplane on short final. Does that make sense? So you're not crossing a runway here, but you're crossing an approach. So it's hold short of the approach. So the same thing, you have to get clearance to cross that approach.
And they refer to it as the
Approach, 1-5 approach, yeah. Approach end, yeah.
Quick question,
Yeah.
if you know, does it depend on what category the ILS is? Depending?
No.
Okay.
No, doesn't. If they hold, well, it could, but if they tell you to hold short of an ILS critical area, you just hold short of the ILS critical area. Yeah. The categories dictate how low the airplane can get to the runway before they have to see something. Okay. Any questions on signage there? Again, I'm not going to. There's lots of sign. There's a lot of signs. So if you go to the AIM, also AOPA, Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. Everybody familiar with that? Anybody not familiar with that? All right, AOPA, AOPA. If you go to AOPA's website, there are flashcards you can download.
You say a lot of good resources.
Signage flashcards where on one side it has a sign, on the other side it has the explanation. You can download these, cut them out, and you can learn the signs that way. And I have seen a lot of examiners on oral exams. They have those flashcards from AOPA, and they'll just know, what does that mean? And they're looking at the answer on the back and holding it in front for you. So I would, and we have a set around here somewhere.
It's not the only ones, but you know,
Yeah. Those are good to look at.
they have a lot of good books too.
Yes, they do. All right, so here's some examples. Just show you an example here of kind of what the whole, flying out of this airport, we're all familiar with these because we see these, right? So here's an example of you're on Charlie here, and here's the hold short for it right here. And you're approaching what runway?
1331.
1331. So if the aircraft are taking off, let's say that you're departing runway 13. When you roll out there, which way you turn into takeoff, left or right?
Right. Right.
Right.
So that's the confusing part. Does it tell you the directions?
Yeah, so it tells you that 13 is this way, is over here, and 31 is over here. Yeah.
Basically, whatever number is on the side of the dash, that's where it is. So like, if it was 31-13, the 31 ending would be on that side, while 13 would be on that side.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. What's different about that one?
Runway 35 is facing towards.
Yeah, but what's different about these two? They're both hold shorts.
One's a land short.
One, that's a land and hold short right there, because that's a runway. See the white markings? So that's a land and hold short. I don't know what runway that is, but it's running into 3517. Okay. There's an example of. So what's this one telling us? What taxiway are you on here? Yep. And Bravo goes both ways. You're crossing Bravo. You could turn left or right on Bravo. Here's an example of a really confusing deal here. This is probably a situation where you might have a hot spot. We'll talk about hot spots here in a minute. But so here, Look at this signage here. If you're taxiing up Bravo here, you know, Sierra's hard left, Foxtrot's kind of that way or that way. You've got all kinds of stuff going on. And one thing that, from an airport operation standpoint, especially at these bigger airports that you're not familiar with, when you get to things that are complicated like this, it's real easy to end up having a runway incursion. It's real easy to have to have the tower say possible pilot deviation. Let me know when you're ready to copy a phone number. You don't want to hear those words. You really don't. I've heard them before. That sucks. So you don't want to hear it. But when you're at airports like this, it's more likely to get them. So what can you do? What can we do as pilots to mitigate that?
Try to study the airport.
Yeah.
Map as best you can.
Study the airport map, yeah. What else could we do with the airport map?
Have a diagram on your.
Have it on our lap. Have it with us. Yeah, have the airport diagram on your kneeboard right in front of you. What else can we do nowadays? Like have your ForeFlight up and you got taxi, you see your little airplane moving around, right? Look, I'm a big proponent of when you're learning, not relying 100% on, ForeFlight. I like to teach, as my students will tell you, I like to teach you, especially prior to solo, how to fly without using that. But look, that's here, and it's real helpful. At some point, you need to get that, and you need to start using it and learn how to use it, because it really helps with this kind of stuff. Okay.
So, if you're in an unfamiliar airport, and this is something that's been kind of rolling around in my head for a while,
Okay.
is that, like, if you're on Bravo and you have instructions that, could be very long. So, taxi to parking, general aviation parking via Sierra, Charlie, Alpha 1
Yep.
to Foxtrot.
Yep.
But there's nothing that really indicates which way on Sierra.
Well, they'll tell you right or left on Sierra. They would tell you left or right on Sierra.
Okay.
Yeah, but the other thing you can do, there's another thing you can do at busy airports like this, where you have these extended or crazy taxi instructions. What else can you do, John?
Write it down.
You write it down. What else can you do?
You can ask for, I can't remember what it's called, but easier directions.
Progressive.
Progressive.
You can ask for a progressive taxi. So you ask for a progressive taxi. Now what they're going to do, and I can tell you that you might think, oh, I really don't want to bother these guys. But again, they would rather do that than the paperwork involved in a pilot deviation, because they have to go through they got to do a lot of paperwork when there's a pilot deviation. That's what they're there for. They don't want to cause problems. Listen, yes, they'd probably rather not have to hold your hand and walk you around the airport and turn left, turn right, turn left, turn right, but they'd rather do that than the paperwork,
And you're a student.
even if you're not a student.
What I'm saying, like,
Yes.
it's implied you're a student.
Yeah.
You're a student.
Right. So progressive taxi, what that would do is they would give you progressive directions. Okay, keep going on Bravo, turn left on Sierra, next taxiway, turn right on Foxtrot, next taxiway, cross this, whatever. They would just give you blow by blow, turn left, turn right, go straight, turn left, turn right, all the way to where you need to go. Okay, so at an unfamiliar airport, towered airport, if you're at all uncertain about where you are or where you're going, ask for a progressive taxi. There's nothing wrong with doing that. Okay. All right. A couple more signage things here that I want to show you, because we have some of these. We have some of these here. So we know that this is a hold short, 2 solids, two dash. This is the ILS critical. Okay. This is taxiway holding position, even though it's dashed. Okay, so what do we mean by that? If you get off of a runway, let's say here's our runway that we landed on. There's a taxiway right here. Okay, and then there's another taxiway here. All right, so here's your taxiway, and you got it does this depending on which way you're going. Then it leads into the runway. Right here, there's likely to be a dash line. That's the taxiway hold short. So let's say you land, let's say this is, 27. And you land on 27, and it's busy. Gets busy around here sometimes, right? When you land at a towered airport, you're going to get from the tower, you could hear a couple of things. Let's say this is a full stop. You're landing and you're done. Okay, it's a full stop. They could say something like clear to land 27, and you're clear to land 27. So now you land on 27, but they're busy. They might come back, and let's say that this is taxiway, I don't know, let's just say it's taxiway Charlie right here. They might come back and say, turn left on Charlie and contact ground. Or they might say, turn left on Charlie, taxi to parking via, let's call this Alpha. Charlie Alpha to parking and stay with me. That means don't change frequencies, just stay on their frequency, okay? Or they might say nothing because they're busy. They don't tell you where to turn off. There's another taxiway down here, and there's another one there. Maybe there's one going that way. Where do you get off? When do you get off? As soon as you can. As soon as you can get off the runway, get off the runway. Whether the tower has said anything to you or not, get off the runway. They need it for other operations. So land, get off. Unless they tell you, maybe you land and here's Charlie, but this happens a lot on 1-3. You land and here's Charlie, but they want you to, they know where they want you to go to Delta. They may say, turn left at Delta. Well, then just keep on taxiing and go to Delta. But if they're busy or if you don't hear anything from them, get off. Just get off the runway. Then what do? You stop right here. You don't cross that line. You stop right there. Now you get past the hold short, right? You get your airplane past the hold short, but you stop before you get on taxiway Alpha. And you call ground. You don't need direction to switch over to ground. You're off the runway now, so who do you talk to when you're off the runway? You talk to ground. So if the tower has not given you any communication, you don't have to ask permission. Get off the runway, call ground. That makes sense? It's logical, okay? So if you haven't gotten if the last direction you got from tower was you're cleared to land, now you take over. Get off the runway, get past the hold short, call ground and say, ground, I'm at Charlie, I'm going to wherever. They'll give you directions to taxi from that point, okay? The reason you stop here is because maybe ground's got somebody else taxiing. Somebody coming this way, you want to go that way, and now you're head to head on a taxiway. That's a problem, right? So you stop there and you make sure you have clearance to get on that taxiway before you get on that taxiway, okay? If tower tells you turn left Charlie, right Alpha to parking, well now you've got your clearance to go wherever you want to go. Does that make sense? All right. So that's a taxi hold short. And if you get to, if you don't see that, let's say you don't see that there, maybe it's not there, maybe it's not painted there. The same thing holds true even if it's not there. If you got off, as an example here, and the tower, if the tower didn't say anything, you got off, or the tower said turn left at Charlie and contact ground, you stop and contact ground. You don't want to get on Alpha without permission to be on Alpha. You don't have permission to be on Alpha. When you get clearance to land, you have permission to get off at any taxiway and stop. You don't have permission to get on other taxiways. Make sense? Okay. All right, this is what's called a non-movement area. So this is a single solid and a single dashed. We have that here. Every time you go out to pre-flight the planes, you'll notice that it's right on the edge of our parking area. You'll see a solid dashed and a solid and a dashed. One solid, one dashed. That's called the non-movement area boundary. So everything on this side, you can't cross that solid line without talking to who? Ground control. You can't cross that without talking to who? Tower. So this one's ground, that one's tower. So if you're on this side over here, you have better already been talking to tower. If you're on this side over here, ground. This side over here, you better have been talking to tower. Make sense? Okay. So again, when you come back in, they gave you, left at Charlie, right on Alpha or whatever, taxi to parking. So your non-movement area would be out here, somewhere. There's your solid and there's your dashed, right? So when you get off and go to parking, you can just get right over there, but you can't turn around and go this way without permission again. Okay? All right. Any other ones on here to look at? Solid yellow that's your taxiway. Solid yellow is the center line of the taxi. And when we taxi, where should we be relative to that solid taxiway line? Right on it. right on it. Put the nose wheel on it. Don't taxi over here. Don't taxi over there. If you're on the center line and you're hitting those little reflectors, boom, boom, move over a little bit because that's annoying as crap. Just get off those things. All right. When you see a double dash like that, that's just showing the edge of the taxiway. And we have these out here. And you can go that way, no problem. When you see a solid like that, that's the edge of the taxiway, but you can't use it. You can't taxi on it. So this is a taxiway edge. This is taxiway edge. This one you can cross. This one you can't. Okay. All right. I said I wasn't going to do a lot of signage, and here I am doing a lot of signage. Didn't mean to. All right, let's bring this slide up. So this is New Braunfels. So here's our airport diagram, and this is out of the Green Book chart supplement. Not all airports, not all public use airports have an airport diagram. Okay. Some of them will have, if the airport has instrument approaches like this one does, it'll have a diagram that looks like this, which is fairly detailed. Okay. If they don't have one like this, but they have one in the chart supplement, it'll kind of look like this, which gives you runway directions and layouts, but it's not as detailed, obviously, as that. But you can see it's the same. So this is what comes up in the airport facility directory, or in the chart supplement. Used to be called airport facility directory. This is what comes up in the chart supplement. This is what's a separate publication that's published for this airport because, and you can find it in here too, but because it has these instrument approaches, there's a little more information to it. Or you could have airports, well, this is a VOR, but you could have airports like this that have no diagram whatsoever. So that's not uncommon either. All right. All right, I want you to pay attention to this right here. You see that yellowish, orangish, brownish oval with a HS1 next to it? That's a hot spot. What's a hot spot?
Where a lot of stuff goes.
A lot of stuff goes on. Hot spot. How do we get a hot spot at an airport? Well, the short answer is we get a lot of pilot deviations right there. We get a lot of copy this phone number and give us a call when you get a minute. A lot of those things happen at these areas, and they happen so much that ATC is able to petition the FAA and have it listed as a hot spot because so many people screw up right there. So if you have this diagram out and you see a hot spot, you need to be like, oh, okay, pay attention. What's happening here? Why do so many pilots have problems here? Okay.
Can you reference that, like when you're communicating with them? Hey, this is hotspot 1, or I'm passing it, or something like that?
No, you don't reference the hotspot to the tower. No, you just need to be aware that right here in this configuration of Delta 1331 and 17, there's issues right there. There's issues that happen right there. I'm one of them. I'm one of the reasons. Well, no, it was already issued and I did it anyway. I'll be honest, I'll tell you what I did. This is. I think I talked a few weeks ago. Did I talk about? You just get in a groove. I can't think of what the term I'm trying to use. I get in a groove. Complacency and yeah. So I'm sitting over here. Here's our little office right there. So our little airplanes are, we're all lined up right over here somewhere.
We're so small.
And we usually, if they're using 17, which is typical, right? Our taxi directions are taxi 17 via Alpha Delta. And then we hold short right there. And then we get clearance and we cross and then we take off, right? That's our usual departure out of here, right? Most of the time, maybe 75% of the time. Well, I got in the plane and they were using 17. And I started up and I taxied right out to Delta and held short. Taxied right out there and called tower, said I'm ready to go. And they said, oh, well, how'd you get there? I'm like, yeah, you know what? I forgot to call ground. I just taxied right out there and stopped. So, but it's just I just do it all the time. So I just got in the plane, I did it. Just taxied right out there. So, anyway, I don't know if that was a reason for the hot spot, but that was something that I screwed up there. And honestly, I think Carl was just like, I don't think he even reported it because he didn't want to do the paperwork. Anyway, so if you see a hot spot, be aware. that's an area where a lot of pilot deviations happen. All right. All right. The movement area or non-movement area line, it's not on here, but it's essentially, so that the taxiway edge would be over here, right? But the non-movement area is over here somewhere. The solid and the dashed, right in there. So anything on this movement area side, and it's a little bit backwards. If you're on the movement area side, then you can't move. If you're on the non-movement area side, you can move. So it's kind of backwards. So on this side of the line, we're on the non-movement area side, which is the side where we can move around without permission. If we're on the movement area side, then we need permission to move. So it's kind of backwards in a sense. But over here, you can drive your car up and down through here. You can ride your bicycle. You can walk. You do whatever you want over here. Nobody has any control over anything. But once you cross that movement area line, you have to have clearance from ground control to do that. Okay. All right. Okay, let's look at some lighting at different airports. I'll show you some beacon lightings and so forth. So here's a blow up of the sectional of the area where we're at. So here's New Braunfels right here. Here's San Marcos, Lockhart, Fentress, so forth. This one's no longer there. That airport's not there anymore. When you look at a sectional chart and you see the airport symbol, if it has a big star at the top of the airport symbol like that, like that, like that. There's not one here, there's not one here, not one there. There's one down here at Huber. Time you see that big star, it means it has a beacon, a rotating beacon, all right? And the colors of the rotating beacon will tell you the type of airport it is. It's either a civilian, a water airport, a heliport, or a military airport. That's going to tell you the type of airport. All right, and you've got different flashes, different colored flashes. So these come in really handy at night. During the day, they're not very handy. They're typically not turned on during the day. If they are turned on, it's daytime. What does that mean? Who knows? If it's working. This airport's beacon hasn't been working for a while. It means it's IFR. It means it's below VFR minimums. So if you see during the day, if you see the rotating beacon going and it's daylight hours, then that means that the field conditions are less than VFR. Okay. All right. The thing to understand though is if it's IFR, it doesn't automatically mean that beacon's going to be on. Somebody up in that tower's got to turn it on, or if it's a non-towered airport, someone's got to turn it on. So just because it's not on doesn't mean it's VFR. Does that make sense? All right. All right, so the colors are white and green if it's a civilian airport. So that's what you want to see. You want to see white, green, white, green, white, green. And generally speaking, I mean, you could memorize these if you want, but generally speaking, for flying what we're flying, we're not in the military, so if you don't see white, green, you can't land there. Don't land there, okay? If you see white and yellow, you can land there one time, all right? If you see white, yellow, green, you could maybe crash there. I don't even think you could land very well.
You could stall it.
Stall. If you see white, white, green, you could land there one time. Yeah. So white, green is what you're looking for. If it's not white, green, don't land there. It's really handy at night. That's what I started to say. It's handy at night. So when you're flying at night and you're trying to find an airport, it's nice to be able to see the flash. Okay, well, there's an airport over there. That might be it. Maybe you see a couple. All right, well, it's one of those two, and you can figure out, where the airport is. So they're handy at night to use. Okay. All right, some other lighting aids that are handy, especially at night, but you use these during the day too, are visual approach indicators, visual glide slope indicators. So we've got two that primarily that you see at airports. There's other types that you don't see very much anymore, but these are the two that you see most of the time. You'll either see PAPIs, which we have here at this airport. You guys have probably seen these before. Or you'll see VASIs, which you typically will see at maybe smaller type airports. PAPIs you'll see usually at airports that are a little larger, but not always. The difference is that a VASI, visual approach slope indicator, simply tells you you're either high on a glide slope or low. That's all it's going to tell you. PAPIs tell you you're high, slightly high, on the path, slightly low or low. So there's just a little more precision to it. And it's a direct descent path. So more than 3.5 degrees, 3.2 degrees, 3 degrees, 2.8 degrees, or less than 2.5 degrees. So it's a little more precision on what you're looking at. But generally speaking, you want white over red, not red over red. Okay? Red over red, you're dead. That's the way to think about it. Red over red, you're dead. Right? Red over white, just right. In this case, red over white this way. White over white, you're too high. Red over red. At this airport, since we have PAPIs, what you want to look for is what in our airplanes, I like this right here because we always have a little bit of a higher approach path. So 3 whites and 1 red. 2 whites and 2 reds once I get close is fine. I don't like this much at all, and I certainly don't like that ever. Okay. If you're flying at night and the runway has visual approach glide slope indicators, either one of these two, what they're doing is they're providing obstacle clearance. So if you stay on or above the glide path, you won't hit anything. If you go below the glide slope, you could hit something that you can't see. Okay? So understand that if the runway has a glide slope, a visual approach glide slope of any type, it's there to keep you from hitting something. So stay on it or above it. Okay. All right. There's other types, as I said. There's pulsating PLASIs and tricolor VASIs, and the book goes into them. It's unlikely that you'll ever see any of those. I may have seen 1 or 2 in the time I've been flying, but these you see all the time. You'll see these everywhere. All right. Let's see if there's any other lighting stuff. Okay, wind indicators real quick. There's 3 basic types of wind indicators. Why do we want to know where the wind's coming from? Why is that important?
So we can take off into the wind,
Yep.
and so we don't stall the aircraft in FTO.
Yes, but it doesn't really have anything to do with stall, but we do want to take off into the wind and land into the wind. Yeah, we want to take off and land into the wind. So we want to know what direction the wind's coming from. It also tells us, it also gives us, if it's coming at an angle, what kind of angle is it coming at. Gives us some indication of the strength. At least one of these gives us some indication of the strength. So the 3 that you're likely to see are a windsock, a tetrahedron, or a wind tee. These you'll see at every airport. If it's an airport, it's going to have probably a windsock somewhere or multiple windsocks. Okay, this airport we have multiple windsocks, and they're usually you will find a windsock somewhere near the approach end of the runway or the departure end of the runway, and it's incredibly important. What I always do, and I'll tell all my students to do this before you take off. What do I tell you to do? Look at the windsock. As you roll onto the runway, find the closest windsock. What's the wind doing right now? As I'm on short final to land, what do I tell you to do? Look at the closest windsock. What's the wind doing right now, just before I round out to land? I always want to find that windsock that's closest to where I'm taking off or landing because I want to know what the wind's doing right now. All right, so windsocks, tetrahedrons, or wind tees. A tetrahedron and wind tees, the tetrahedron points into the direction that the wind is coming. A wind tee is more like an airplane. See, it's got that vertical fin, so it aligns, it weather vanes into the wind. So it's kind of, the airplane in this case is flying into the wind. The tetrahedron is pointing into the direction the wind's coming. And the windsock obviously, blows backwards. I prefer, out of all 3 of these, that one. I prefer that one right there, okay? Because it gives me a couple of indications. First of all, these 2, by the way, these 2 can be set. They can be locked into a position, okay? And many airports have calm wind runways or runway preferred use runways. And airports, I'm not saying they do, but they could lock this thing in a direction to tell you this is the runway I want you to use. That's great, but I still like to know where the wind is coming from. If this is locked in position, it's not really giving me the wind information. This always will. And it'll do two things. It'll give me some indication of the velocity based on how it's hanging, and also whether it's gusty, right? So I'll get a lot of information out of a windsock. So I like the windsock for that reason. All right, around a wind indicator, you will sometimes find what's called a segmented circle. So you'll have this segmented circle around the windsock. Used to see these much more than you see them now. You'd see them a lot. Now I think they've kind of fallen away a little bit, and I think it's due to the fact that so many airports now have AWOS or ASOS. So you can get wind information pretty readily with AWOS or ASOS now. Whereas before, like when I started flying, you didn't have any of that unless it was a tower airport. And so you would have to overfly the airport. Unless there was somebody in the pattern, you hear people talking, or you could call somebody on the ground at the Unicom and say, hey, what are the winds? And they could tell you what the winds were. That's the way we would get it. If you couldn't, you have to overfly the airport and find the segmented circle. It's hard to see that little windsock, but you could find the segmented circle, and then you could key in on the windsock and look at the windsock, then decide what runway you wanted to use and come around and set up for the runway. So the segmented circle was a way for you to visually see it, okay, if you didn't know where it was at. And then sometimes these segmented circles would have these traffic pattern indicators kind of sticking out like that. And those traffic pattern indicators are going to give us the direction of the pattern, whether it's left traffic or right traffic, depending on the runway that is in use, okay? So this example is showing us an airport that has a runway that's going in this direction, and a runway, and it doesn't have to be right here. It could be a runway, the runway could be right here, right? It's just, there's a runway that's going in this direction, right here, and there's a runway that's going in that direction right there. And what these pattern indicators are showing us is that if we're landing on this runway, then here's the base leg, and we're turning left. So the entire pattern is left-hand traffic. If we're using this runway, if we're using that runway, there's the base leg, so the entire traffic is right pattern. If we were on this runway, the pattern, there's the base leg, there's final, so it's left traffic, left turns. If we're using this runway, it's right traffic, right turns. So that's what the pattern indicators show us. So this is showing us the final, or it's the longer leg is showing us the runway. That's the final approach. That's the base leg. So you can determine whether it's left traffic or right traffic. Okay? If there were no pattern indicators on there, what would the traffic be? Left. Always left. All turns are to the left, unless otherwise indicated through this, or on the chart, on the sectional chart. Next week I'll show you on the sectional chart where it'll show you. If it's supposed to be a right pattern, and now we're talking more about non-controlled airports, obviously. If it's supposed to be a right pattern, then it will be indicated on the chart. It'll say RP13 or RP36 or something like that, right pattern. If it doesn't say anything, then it's left traffic, okay? But this is another way to see it. If they have it, again, these are you can still find these out there, but they're kind of going away. They're kind of disappearing. All right, and in the center of this segmented circle, you could have any of the three indicators, but generally it's a sock. That's generally what you see as a windsock. All right, let's take our first break. And if you didn't sign in for me. Okay. So we've kind of talked about some signage and some paints and markings and signage and that kind of stuff. I want to kind of get into the pattern. What are the pattern legs? Why do we have a pattern? How is it different at non-towered airports versus towered airports and all that kind of stuff? That's kind of important for us to recognize. So let me first talk about the pattern, the traffic pattern. Why do we have a traffic pattern? Well, it's so that, if you boil it right down to it, it's so that we have less of an opportunity to run into each other. It's collision avoidance, right? So what we're trying to do is all do the same thing kind of in the same way so that we know where to look for other people and so that we don't run into each other. But when it comes to mid-air collisions, which happen fairly frequently, mid-air collisions,
There was just
Where-
a SeaWorld helicopter collision.
yeah, where do they happen? Where do mid-air collisions typically, where do they typically occur, and on what kind of weather conditions do they typically occur in?
VFR, clear, 4 miles.
VFR clear, close to airports, in the traffic pattern, essentially. That's where they happen. Well, why do they happen like that? Why are those the circumstances that are prevalent when they occur?
High traffic, low visibility.
No, high visibility. It's good visibility. It's VFR. The condition. It's days like today.
Yeah.
That's when collisions occur.
That's weird to me.
That's because everybody's flying. It's a nice day.
Ah.
There's a lot of people flying.
So increased.
There's more traffic.
Increased traffic,
Sure.
people flying at the same altitude or similar altitude.
Well, and where do airplanes congregate?
At the airport.
The airport. So, where you're more than likely to see other airplanes? At the airport, right? And when are you going to see the most of them? When it's a nice day. So, where do we have collisions? Around airports on nice days. That's when they happen, right?
And then it
All right,
becomes
so we
not
have,
nice day.
and it becomes a not nice day. So that's why we have traffic patterns, and that's why we have some rules that we want to try and follow when it comes to traffic pattern operations. All right, they're really, really important at non-towered airports, but they're equally as important at towered airports. So let me just talk about the pattern, the legs of the pattern. First of all, what are they called, and so forth, and then we'll talk about the differences between operating in the traffic pattern at a towered airport versus operating in the traffic pattern at a non-towered airport. All right, so the legs, let's call this our runway right here. All right, and let's just kind of make an assumption that the wind is blowing in that general direction. All right, so we're going to be landing on this runway, whatever this is. We'll call that runway 27 or whatever. We have a leg we're going to take off. We start rolling down here. We're going to take off maybe somewhere around here. And we begin our departure. That's the departure leg. Okay, that's the departure leg. All right. Then if we're staying in the pattern, we're going to turn in a direction that is crosswind. We're going to turn crosswind, right? So that's the crosswind leg. And then we're going to turn downwind. We're going with the wind, so that's the downwind leg. All right. Then you might want to call this crosswind again, but we don't. We call it base. We call it the base leg, and then that one is the easy one to, everybody remembers that one. That's final. That's the final approach leg. All right, so those are the legs that pretty much everyone kind of remembers or familiar with, right? But there's a couple other legs that fall into this. And if I take a point at the middle of the downwind right there, okay, and I go 45 degrees, and I draw a line out this way, I call that the 45-degree entry. That's the 45-degree entry leg into the pattern. Okay, I'll talk about that in a minute. And then we have another leg. If this is the downwind leg, what if we were flying in this direction? What would we call that leg? The upwind leg. That would be upwind, all right? And I'm just going to stop it right there for a minute. I mean, I could extend it out here and go crosswind here. Okay, and I will. Upwind, crosswind. Okay? So you really got upwind, crosswind, downwind, base, and final. And then you have a departure leg. All right? Frequently, you will hear this leg called the upwind leg. You should only hear this called the upwind leg at a towered airport. So at a towered airport, this could be referred to, and usually is referred to, as the upwind leg. And this is going to make sense to you as we go through this. Technically, it is not the upwind leg. It is the departure leg, because you're departing. That's the departure leg. The tower can get away with calling it an upwind leg for reasons that we'll get into in a minute. All right. Let's talk about what the FAA has to say about patterns. Everything we do has rules and regulations, right, that we deal with, rules and regulations. The FAA makes those rules and regulations. And in this circular 9066, everyone should download AC 9066. AC 9066 is all about traffic patterns. Okay? You should download and read AC 9066. It has all the rules and standard operating procedures that we're going to go over here today, and what the FAA says we need to do. The FAA has very few regulatory rules related to traffic patterns, believe it or not. Very few. Very few. Here's what they are. I'm going to write them up here for you. Here's the FAA's rules. 1, left turns, unless otherwise specified. That's a regulatory rule. You will make turns to the left. You will not do right patterns unless that airport, that runway specifies right pattern for that runway. Then you'll do right pattern. But if it's not specified, left turns, left traffic, left closed circuit. You'll hear these things a lot. Students ask me, what does that mean? You'll hear left traffic, left pattern, left circuits, left closed circuits, left closed pattern. All mean the same thing. I'm staying in the traffic pattern, I'm turning left. Okay? That's one rule. Here's the newest rule. Just very recently, within the past 10 years or so, they came up with this rule. Traffic pattern altitude equals 1,000 feet AGL. That's it. There's your rules. That's your rules right there. Everything else that I've drawn up here are standard operating procedures. Nothing else up here is regulatory per AC 9066. These are it. That's it right there. And the 1,000-foot AGL, this is for, I'll just go ahead and put this, this is for single-engine land airplane, or single-engine aircraft. If it's a multi-engine airplane, you have a different altitude. If it's a jet, different altitude. But for us, 1,000 feet, or if it's helicopters, it's 500 feet. But for us, for what we're flying, it's 1,000 feet. That's our pattern altitude. Above ground level, okay? And left turns. All right, so if this is the runway that we're using at this airport, and I'm coming from over here, let's say, I can't legally do this and land. That's illegal. I cannot come along like this and make right turns. That's illegal. I could come from over here and just do a long 15-mile or 50-mile straight in and just land. That's perfectly legal. It's not a good idea, but there's nothing illegal about it. I could come from here and just do a base and land. Nothing illegal about it, right? I could come from over here and just get on the downwind and turn base and land. Nothing illegal about that, right? I just have to be at 1,000 feet in the pattern. That's legal. And I have to make left turns unless I'm doing a straight in, right? I can't make right turns. That's it. All right. The reason that we have this layout and these SOPs, standard operating procedures, is so that we lessen the chance of running into other people. So if we're all doing the same thing, we know where to look. We know how to communicate on the radio to tell people I'm here and I'm doing this, these are my intentions. And people know where to look. So if I were to say I'm on the 45, let's call this runway 27. We'll call this runway 27 since it's going, if that's north, it's going west. And we'll call this runway 9, that'd be going east. So if I was over here and I said, I don't know, Hinckley Airport, 261 Romeo Alpha is on the 45 for 27. Everybody knows to look at 1,000 feet AGL along a line that goes right here for me. That's where I'm at. I'm on this line somewhere. If I said I'm on 2 mile 45, they're going to look approximately 2 miles out on that line for me at 1,000 feet. Right? If I said I'm on a 2 mile base, they're going to look along this line for me somewhere out here at 2 miles. Right? Everybody knows where to look. If I said, if this is a non-towered airport, I could say Hinckley Airport, 261 Romeo Alpha's midfield upwind. They're going to look right here, flying this way. Upwind. Because this is the upwind, this is the departure. Right? Does that make sense? So the legs matter. What leg you're on matters, and calling them by the right name matters. Because everything we're doing in any, whether it's non-controlled or controlled, everything we're doing, the reason we're using the radio, if we have a radio, by the way, at an untowered airport, you don't have to have a radio. You can have planes flying around here without a radio. So it's even more important that they're following these procedures so you know where to look for traffic. Just because you don't hear somebody on the radio doesn't mean there's nobody there. At all. Does not mean that. They might have a radio, maybe they're on the wrong frequency. I can't tell you how many times I see that happen. People flying around and no, they're not using the radio and they're on the wrong frequency. Right? Or they don't have a radio. So you're always looking. Lost my train of thought. Anyway, non-towered airport. You can be on the leg that you're on, where you're at matters. Communicating matters where you're at. Other people are going to be looking where you say you are. If this is a towered airport, okay, if it's a towered airport, the reason you wouldn't have an upwind leg is because now the tower might have you on left traffic or right traffic. So there is no upwind leg other than this leg. You're not going to have somebody going this direction at a towered airport. You could have two people going in this direction, a left downwind and a right downwind, but you're not going to have them going in opposite directions. So you don't have to worry about, if you're at a non-towered airport and you're on the upwind, you don't have to worry about somebody turning right and coming at you. Does that make sense? That's the reason that on a non-towered airport you can have an upwind, a crosswind, a downwind, a base, and a final, and a departure. At a towered airport, there is no upwind. So the tower chooses to call this the upwind. So here, you will hear the tower frequently say, continue your upwind, and I'll call your crosswind. Everybody ever heard that? Continue your upwind, I'll call your crosswind. That's just telling you, just keep going this way, they'll tell you when to turn. They can call it an upwind because they're not going to have anybody over here using an upwind, but at a non-towered airport you could. Does that make sense? All right. All right. Typical entry, let's talk about non-towered airports here. I'm going to leave this up on the board and I'm just going to draw another airport over here, a smaller one over here. Same scenario, this is our pattern. And that's our 45 coming in, we're landing right there. Okay. In that AC over there, in that AC 9066, the FAA gives us direction on how to enter the pattern. It's not regulatory. What is regulatory? What do they say that's regulatory? Left turns, 1,000 foot AGL for traffic pattern altitude. For single engine, yeah, for what we're flying. I think it's 1,500 for multi-engine, it's 500 for helicopters. It's a little bit different altitudes. Okay, there's three methods. There's three methods to enter a non-towered airport traffic pattern. If it's a towered airport, and I'll spend more time talking about non-towered, because if it's towered, they're going to tell you who was asking that question? Somebody asked that question. They're going to tell you. Enter the left downwind for runway 13. Enter the right base for runway 13. Give me a 4 mile straight in. They're going to tell you where to go. So it's real simple. But at a non-towered airport, you have to line up and get in line and do the things that you're supposed to be doing so everybody else knows where to look. Okay, and you know where to look. So here's the three methods of entry in the order that the FAA wants to see them in. Okay, one, the best method of entry is the 45 degree entry. This one right here. Get on this line right here and enter the downwind. That's the method that the FAA wants to see. And if we're landing at this airport and I'm anywhere over here, that's a perfectly viable method. There's no reason not to enter on the 40. There's no real good reason, unless there's an emergency or something, there's no good reason not to get on the 45 and enter the pattern. All right? But what if I'm coming from over here? Now, how do I get myself on this side to get to the 45? That's where these two methods come in. All right? So method one assumes you're on the entry side. You're on the entry side. If you're on the entry side, then just get on the 45. It's simple. Get on the 45. If you're on the non-entry side, now you have two ways to get over here. All right. The one they prefer is the midfield. I'm going to call it midfield teardrop to the 45. Midfield teardrop. Okay? So what we're going to do there is we're going to, if we're coming from over here, we're going to cross over the field at the middle. Right over the middle of the field at an altitude of TPA plus 500 feet. So you're going to be at 1,500 feet AGL. You're going to fly out (2 miles). You're going to descend to TPA and you're going to do a teardrop back to the 45. Okay, so descend to TPA and then teardrop back to the 45.
That's simple.
Okay, that's method two. That's what they want to see. Do you have to do that? Nope, because it's not regulatory. If you're on your check ride and the examiner wants you to go to this airport and you're on this side, that's what you're going to do. Okay, that's what you're going to do. All right, the third method is the crosswind. Crosswind entry. Midfield, absolutely. Midfield crosswind. Midfield crosswind entry. Okay. Midfield crosswind means that you're coming along this line again, right over the midfield, but you're doing this at TPA, so you're at 1,000 AGL. You're at TPA, you cross over and turn onto the downwind. Okay, that's the third method. So those are the three methods. So one, if you're on the entry side, get on the 45. If you're on the non-entry side, do midfield teardrop, so you're 500 high, go 2 miles, descend to TPA, teardrop, back to the downwind. Or midfield crosswind is at TPA and just turn onto the crosswind. Those two. Those are the other two. Those are the two methods if you're on the non-entry side. Okay, everybody, can you kind of sort of make sense of that? All right, anybody have any questions on why we have two and not just one? Anybody come up with any reasons why? Does one seem better than the other? What do you think?
I sort of like number two more
Okay,
because it's easier to do a big turn rather than a small and tight turn. And also, it isn't like almost, let's say like someone just took off and they're going down the downwind. It's almost like they're cutting them off almost.
okay. All right, well, let's talk about the turn. The turn, making that turn is no different than making that turn or that turn or that turn or that turn. So it's not a tight turn. It's not a hard turn to make. But your second logical point was a good one.
Be a hot spot. More people easier from this side.
Say that again?
It's gonna be kind of like a hot spot.
Right
We're
here?
entering the traffic pattern.
At
This side.
TPA?
Yeah.
Okay,
And then you are as well.
right. Okay, what did you say?
Easier to merge.
On this one?
Teardrop.
On the teardrop?
Probably depends per traffic.
That's the answer. Depends on the traffic. Is it a really busy, is you got a bunch of people in this pattern? If we got a bunch of people in this pattern, I'm doing the teardrop. If there's one other guy and I see him, I'm going to do a direct entry. Or not a direct entry, a crosswind midfield entry. That's the key. How many people are there, right? Just because you don't hear people on the radio, though, doesn't mean there's not a lot of people there, so you want to be careful, okay? There's another thing, there's another reason here that I would argue that this would be a better method. Unless I know it's really busy, this is the method I'm using right here. And I'll explain why I'm using that method. Who's responsible for not running into other airplanes? You are. What do you have to do to not run into other airplanes?
See it.
You got to see them. If you don't see them, you're likely to run into them, right? Either you got to see them or they got to see you, or both you got to see each other. So how do we do collision avoidance?
Visual.
How do we do it?
Visual looking.
Yeah, how are you looking for traffic? Scanning. How are you scanning?
My eyes.
What's your method? Do you have a method? You just do this?
No,
What do you do?
left, right, up, down. So left to right, up, and down.
Okay. So generally speaking, what you want to do is take everything you can see. So I'm going this way. I can't see, 180 degrees behind me. I've got the airplane and things in my way. I have blind spots, right? But I can look as far back this way as I can look, and I can see a little further on my left side because I'm sitting if I'm in the pilot side. I see a little further this way than I can see that way, right? Unless I'm in a tandem airplane, then I can see the same. But if it's side by side, I can't see quite as far that way. But the point is I'm going to take as much of the sky as I can see, all right? And let's say this is the amount of sky that I can see right here, from looking left to looking right. So I can look all the way over here, and I can look all the way over here. What I want to do is take maybe 10 degrees of that, okay, and scan. Here's my horizon. Scan above, scan below, move to the next section. Scan above and below, and so forth, then move to the next section, move to this section. So I'm going to look over here, and I'm going to kind of look above and below the horizon some distance and check that section out, and then move to the next section, above and below, the next section, above and below, all the way around. You have to, and you should be doing this right now. You should be developing your scan, your method of scan. How much time should you be looking outside the airplane versus looking at the instrument panel?
Right now, all the time.
How- 90%. 90% of the time. 80 to 90% of the time. I think the book says 90%. Okay, so that means a lot of looking outside. Why are you smiling? You look at the instruments too much?
No, Sebastian said I look out the window like a peacock.
Like, okay, well, good. Well, then you're doing what you're supposed to do. You should be looking outside.
Now, question, with that method of checking every 10 degrees, what if it's too slow and there's an aircraft on the other side of your vision and you don't see it coming, and then inside the aircraft you get like the traffic warning towards like climb now or descend now?
Well, you do what you can do. If you get a traffic avoidance warning, then do it. Resolve that, whatever that is. But look, so my point is develop a system. So maybe start here, go all the way around. So here's 90%, 10%, 90%, 10%.
That's why I do it that way.
Okay, so what I do is I'll do this to the center, look, center, and back, look, back, center, look, whatever. It doesn't matter. Whatever you do, just start looking, right? Begin a scan. All right. If you're just out flying, that's what you're doing. But what if you're in the pattern? Or well, let's forget. Let's say this. Let's say you're looking. Let's say this is the area that you're looking at right here. Okay? And you see traffic. You see something up here. What does that mean? He's above you. If you see traffic down here, below you. What if you see traffic somewhere in here? Pretty much he's at your altitude. Pretty much at your altitude. All right? All right, so we're talking patterns here. When we get into the pattern, I tell my students, when you get within 2 to 3 miles of the airport, 3 miles or so of the airport, what altitude should you be at? Tim, what altitude should you be at? Pattern altitude. Why? Because where do collisions occur?
Near airport.
Near airports. And where are planes at when they're in the pattern? Pattern altitude. Therefore, if you're at pattern altitude, where are you looking? You're looking here instead of all this other stuff. Get to pattern altitude and start scanning the horizon, right? Just above and below the horizon. That's where you're looking for traffic. Now, you're not wasting time looking way up here and way down here. You're looking at pattern altitude. Now, be aware that who's going to, in this pattern right here, who's going to be at that altitude? Well, this leg should be at that altitude at least to about here. This leg should be at that altitude. This leg should be at that altitude. Right? Everything else, this is climbing. This could be climbing. You should be at TPA before you turn onto the downwind. You should never be climbing into the downwind or descending into the downwind, ever. You should be at TPA before you turn onto the downwind, okay? And you should be at TPA on your 45. So when you're approaching this airport, you're looking for these traffic. Now, if you hear somebody saying, I'm departing the runway, now you're looking for that traffic down below because you're trying to find them, right? If you hear traffic in the pattern, they should be telling you what leg they're on or what their intentions are. You should visually try to find them. Does that make sense? Where do collisions occur? If you're going to that airport to land and there's 5 planes in that traffic pattern, how many planes should you try and find?
All 5.
All 5 of them. You should try and find all 5 of those airplanes so that you don't run into any of them. Because if you only find 4, you're likely to run into number 5. So you don't want to do that. So try to find them all. If you know they're there, try to find them. Okay. All right, so now I'm getting to why I like this entry better than that entry. If it's not real busy, okay, I prefer this one. If it's real, if there's 5 people in the pattern, I'm going to use that method right there. But if it's not real busy, I'm going to use this method right here. And I'm going to explain why. It has to do with this. It has to do with this right here. It has to do with where I'm looking. For those of you that are flying right now, have you picked out traffic? Have you seen other aircraft while you're flying? Is it easier to see traffic that's kind of at the horizon or above than it is down in the ground clutter?
Yeah.
Okay. So when I fly over the top of the airport at 500 feet above the traffic pattern altitude, let's assume there's my runway and I'm 500 above TPA and I'm going to fly out towards John and do my teardrop back in. Maybe there's 3 people in the pattern. And I'm approaching and all right, I see all 3. See all 3, okay, now I lost all of you. I have no idea where you are now. Now I'm going to descend over here and I'm going to come back around. Now I got to find you all again. Okay, I don't like that method very much. If I come in at pattern altitude, there's 3 of you, I see all 3 of you, I never lose sight of you. I never have to lose sight of you. Once I see you, and I can get over here and turn onto my downwind knowing I'm not cutting anybody off. Does that make sense? That's the reason I like this method. It's more for collision avoidance. Once I pick up traffic, I really don't want to lose you and have to find you again. And when you do this method, you necessarily will lose all of them and have to find them again. That's why I prefer this one, but only if it's not that busy. It's more of a direct way in.
Also, a lot can happen in 4 miles.
Yes.
Go into pattern
Yeah.
and land it.
Yeah, everything's changed. Yeah, you're acquiring and then you lose it, you have to reacquire versus acquire and keep it and
And
land.
then once you reacquire, instead of it being 5 planes, you could turn around and then you hear 7 planes, but you only see 5 of them.
Right, exactly right. Okay,
Yesterday, the pattern got really crowded here.
yeah.
Because deer on the runway.
Oh, yeah, that'll do it.
Do a go around.
Yeah, that deer on the runway, that'll do
Are they
it.
dead or alive?
No, it's 3 deer running across the runway, and so
If-
the tower was trying to coordinate with a truck to get the deer out of the runway. So in the meantime, we had 3 aircraft,
If he was
including us,
if
out
he-
there in the pattern.
if he was dead, you might have seen a crashed airplane next to it.
It would have been us.
Yeah,
Or at least a broken nose gear.
yeah, exactly.
And broken.
All right. Well, the battery
The
on that
clock
thing
is
is
broken.
that is definitely broken. He changed the batteries yesterday. Okay. All right. So those are your methods of entry at non-towered airports. At a non-towered airport, another method of entry is this kind of direct crosswind entry. But let's say you're coming from over here. All right. Then I would enter, and I do this a lot. Going to Kingsbury, as a matter of fact, from here, I use this entry frequently. Kingsbury has a 1433 and we kind of come in from here. If I'm not sure what runway's in use, the windsock, I know the windsock's right about here, okay? As I'm coming in right here, this is either an upwind for 1-4 or a downwind for 3-2. So as I get here, I see the sock, and if the sock is showing me that I'm landing 1-4, I simply turn and do a crosswind, midfield crosswind, and enter the downwind. So I enter on either an upwind or a downwind. I don't know which it is yet, but I'm on the correct side. I see the sock. If it's favoring 3-2, then I call it the downwind for 3-2. If it's favoring 1-4, then I do a crosswind for 1-4. But I do it at pattern altitude, right? So you can see how the upwind is usable at a non-towered airport. All right. Why do we do the crosswind right here? Why do we do the crosswind there, over the middle of the airport, as opposed to out over here?
You don't want to actually collide with taking off aircraft.
Yeah, these airplanes taking off can reach your altitude. From a vertical separation standpoint, where would you have maximum vertical separation? Right over the middle of the airport, because those airplanes are on the ground. When I was flying out of Chicago and we would do lakefront flights frequently, and you talk to Midway to get through the airspace, they would oftentimes take me right over the top of Midway at 500 feet above the ground. Right over the middle of the runway. Why? That's the safest place to be. Everybody's taking off and landing below me, and they would just take me right over the middle of the runway. All right. Any questions?
Is there any rule of thumb as to how long what distance the crosswind or base?
Oh, yes, sorry, I'm glad you asked that question. All right, so this is a sticky point with me, but this should be, a third to a half mile or so, somewhere in that neighborhood is what it should be. The key thing you want to think about and this is whether it's a towered airport or non-towered airport. This is just all the time. Okay, you don't want to be so far out on your downwind that if you had some kind of an emergency, you could not make it back to the runway. And if you're way out here, like you see some of these planes around here fly, and if they had a problem out here, they wouldn't make it back to the runway because they fly these big giant patterns. You want to be a little closer than that. If you fly a high wing airplane, it's kind of easy to do. It's easy to judge this. I'll show you kind of a rule of thumb. If it's a high wing airplane that has a strut like ours do, okay, here's your strut, right? If from your eyesight, if you look down about halfway through the strut, you should be looking at the runway. So as you're on the downwind and you're looking, and if you're looking at the runway here, you're way too close. If you're looking at the runway here, you're way too far away. So just use that guide as you get on that downwind. If the runway's about halfway through the strut, you're a good distance away, provided you're at the right altitude. Well, even if you're not, even if you're higher, that works, because the higher you go, you're just going up on that line, and the lower you go, you're still on that line. Okay, but try to be at 1,000 feet, because that's pattern altitude, and then in that position. Okay, that makes sense? All right. All right, so this is kind of what I've drawn there. The patterns and the pattern entries right there, okay? If you're exiting, let's talk about exiting. I didn't talk about departing there. If you're departing, there's a couple of ways to depart. If you're departing in the direction that you're going, and you just do a straight out departure and just go. But if you want to get back in some other direction, okay, you got a couple of options. One is depart on a 45 off the departure end, okay, climb up above pattern altitude, well above pattern altitude, and then turn on your way. Right? Get above pattern altitude because everybody else is coming in, or should be coming in at pattern altitude. All right? If you're departing this direction, I recommend just getting in the pattern and doing a downwind departure. just depart off the downwind. You can call that, I'm going to do a downwind departure. And you could continue climbing in that case. You could go downwind or you could climb through that, but you could just do a downwind departure. Okay, those are departure methods. But you're to turn, this is non-towered, turn left. Don't turn this way because this is not right pattern at this airport. Unless it's right traffic, then you're going to turn that way. Then once you get above pattern altitude, now you can go wherever you want. But make sure you're making your turns to the left to get out. Okay? That's a proper departure procedure. If you have airports with parallel runways, then you're very likely to get left traffic on this one and right traffic on that one for obvious reasons.
Oh, and real quick, I was looking down there when you switched slides, and I saw it went from looking like one of those little bugs that would float on the water that would just skim across. That's what it looked like to me.
What was a bug?
Like the little bugs you see, like the water skimmers or something. I forgot what they're called.
Water
but-
strider.
Yeah, to where all the legs are backwards and they like.
Are you talking about this right here?
Yeah.
Oh,
to where they
okay.
glide across the
Gotcha,
water.
gotcha.
And I noticed when you went to the parallel runways.
Yeah, then it's a little different.
That's
Yeah,
really-
yeah. All right. One other thing to be worried about if you're flying at an airport like this with parallel runways, be really cautious of this. In this case, you're on runway, let's call it 9 right and 9 left. If you're on 9 right and you've got operations going on 9 left at the same time, never blow through final. Don't ever base and go through final. You end up, there was a collision just a couple of years ago where that occurred, where somebody's on final here and somebody blew through it there and they ran into them, right? So be real careful about doing operations on parallel runways in that when you turn on your base, don't overshoot final. Turn and make sure you don't overshoot your center line.
Question, was that collision general aviation?
Yes, it was general aviation.
Right.
Yep.
Do
Yep.
you know what aircraft were involved?
One was a Cirrus and the other was, I don't remember, something else. Okay. All right, let's talk towered operations now. I'm going to black this out. Talk towered operations, same thing. How do we get in and out of it? Specifically, I'll deal with this airport, all right? I'll draw this one up here. Any questions on non-towered operations as far as getting in and out of the pattern? We'll talk communications here in a minute. All right, I'm going to talk about towered operation now. Getting in and out of the pattern. All right, I'll kind of put our airport up here, kind of sort of in the direction that it goes. So we've got 17, guess it would go this way, 1735, right? And we've got 1331, something like that, right? That kind of sort of look familiar? All right, so we've got 35 down here, we've got 17, we've got 31, and we've got 13. Generally speaking, our practice area is out here to the east. Okay, if they're using runway 17, then the typical pattern would be left traffic, and the tower will typically give you left traffic. That's their standard, right? They'll give you right traffic occasionally. How many of you have them give you right traffic before? If you haven't, you will. It'll happen frequently, okay? Typically, they give you left traffic. And by the way, why does the FAA say that left turns are standard? Why do we make turns to the left? Because you're sitting on the left side. You can see better. That's why. Yeah, you can see better from that side. Everything's easier if you're making left turns. Especially if you have a side-by-side. If it's a tandem airplane, it makes no difference. But if you're side-by-side, it's easier to see on the left. Okay, so we have the same legs here when the tower is operational, right? Except this now is not the departure, this is the upwind, the crosswind, the downwind, the base, and the final. What we do not have at a towered airport is this leg right here. There is no such thing as a 45 at a towered airport. The tower's never going to say enter the 45 for the downwind. They're never going to say that. They might say enter the left downwind or enter the left base or give me a straight in, but you'll never hear them say give me a 45. That leg doesn't exist at a towered airport. Why? Because we're not getting in line to sequence ourselves. The purpose for the 45 is so that we can kind of get in line and sequence ourselves into the pattern and have an entry in, so that as we tell other pilots that we're on the 45, they know where to look for us as we're coming in, okay? All right, so you won't have a 45 at a towered airport. Is this airport always a towered airport? No. Tower goes home at 7 o'clock. So at 7 o'clock, this returns. At 7 o'clock, we have a 45. For this runway, we have a 45 for that runway, we have a 45 for that runway, and we have a 45 for that runway. Right? Depending on the runway you're using. So when the tower is not operational, this is an uncontrolled field. When the tower is operational, then they are telling us how to enter the pattern, what they want us to do, and giving us clearances. Okay? So generally, coming in from the east, which usually that's where we train at. We train out in the east for a number of reasons. It's not incredibly busy. It's flat, so if there's any emergencies, there's all kinds of places to land, as opposed to going up towards the hill country where if you have an emergency, it's a little more dicey, right? So I like the east. And when we're coming in from the east and we're using runway 17, the typical response, well, you call 10 miles out and you say, hey, Tower 1 Romeo Alpha is 10 miles east, landing with Bravo. And they'll say what? What do they say next?
Report 4 miles.
They say report 4 miles. They'll give you another reporting point. Then you call them at 4 miles and then they'll tell you what to do, okay? And they'll typically say something like enter the midfield left downwind 17, or report midfield left downwind 17. Or they might say enter the left base 17, report 2 miles, or something like that. They're going to give you ask you to do something. All right, so here's the reason. Let me draw this a little bit smaller. Let's call that the airport. And here's the 4 mile ring. I'm just going to draw that half of it, right? And here's that housing development over there. That everybody knows the housing development that is 4 miles. Okay, that's their call. All right. And there's a tower out here that's 8 miles. And you got 135, the road, that's 10 miles. That's 10, that's 8. All right, so you call it 10 miles or call it 8 miles. And they will typically say, and what's the call? The communication is what? When we communicate, this is airport operations. Communication is formulaic. What's
Who, where,
who, where, what? That's the formula. Who, where, what? Who you're calling, who you are, where you are, what you want. And then the fifth thing is one of two things. If it's a tower, you're going to say with something. If it's non-towered, you're going to give the airport name again. I'll explain this in a minute. So 5 is either going to be with whatever the ATIS information is or the airport name again. So who, where, what. So coming in from the east, let's say we're over here, we're 10 miles out. So we're right here at the 10 mile mark at the toll road over there. And we're going to say New Braunfels. We will have already listened to ATIS, right? Because we need to listen to ATIS before we make our calls. Why? Why do we do that? Why do we listen to ATIS before we call ground or tower?
weather info.
Yeah. Weather, altimeter, all that kind of stuff, right? So it's information that we need to know to operate in or out of that airport. So they record it. It's our responsibility to listen to it, because if we don't, they would have to then regurgitate this pre-recorded stuff that we should have already listened to before we even called them. Okay, so listen to that first. So let's say it's Bravo. New Braunfels Tower, 124 Golf X-rays, 10 miles east. So who you're calling, New Braunfels Tower, who you are, 124 Golf X-ray, 10 miles east, landing with Bravo. Right, that's the formula. This is always the easiest call to make, because you know what you're going to say. And then your brain reformats as soon as they speak back to you. Right? That's what happens until you get used to it. So, because you can write this down ahead of time and get ready for it. Then you say it, and then they start talking. All you hear is that's all that comes out of your mouth. Right? All right. So they're going to tell you They're going to tell you typically, okay, they're going to say, could they give you a clear, you're 10 miles out, could they say cleared to land 17?
There's nobody else in the area, maybe.
Maybe, I've had them do it before.
Same.
If it's just dead, you know, it's late in the day, there's nobody flying, there's nothing going on, they could say, yeah, all right, clear to land 17. They could clear to land from way out here. Usually they won't. Usually they'll say, 124 Golf X-ray, report 4 miles. So now, and what will you read back? Report 4 miles, 124 Golf X-ray, right? So now you're going to get here and you're going to call them again. And the reason to call them again, coming into here, the reason to call them again is because now you're close enough where they can give you some kind of a sequence. Out here, they may have 3 people in the pattern, let's say. Let's say there's 3 people in the pattern. You call 10 miles. They're going to say report 4 miles. Because they can't tell you to enter the base or enter the left downwind, or they don't know where everybody else is going to be by the time you get here, so they can't give you any further instruction. You got to get a little bit closer. That's why they have you report when you get a little bit closer. Now you get here, and likely, more than likely, they'll say, okay, enter the left base, or enter the left downwind, or report midfield downwind, or something. They'll give you some further direction on what to do. All right. And then once you make that report, once you're here, now they're likely to give you either your clearance or, you know, extend your downwind. You'll be following somebody on a 3-mile file, whatever. They'll give you some further information. Does that make sense? The reason that they do that? Okay. The way to get used to this communication stuff, there's a couple of ways. One, you can listen to, is it ATC, or is it Live ATC? LiveATC.net or something like that?
Yeah.
You go to liveatc.net and you can put in this frequency for this airport or any airport in the United States. And you can listen and you'll listen to the radio calls. And what you'll start to hear is this formula over and over and over and over and over again. This is the formula that you hear over and over again. It's not necessarily critical, especially as you're learning, that you get all this in the right order. It's more important that you get all of it in the call. Okay, really important. And when you return the call, well, let me back up. So let's say we make this call. When you're flying into an airport that you're familiar with, like this one, you should already have. When I make this call, as an example, when I make this call over here at 8 or 10 miles, first of all, I've already been listening to the tower. I already know what's happening over there. I already know what's going on over there. I already know, even before I make this call, what they're going to tell me. I know, I pretty much with about 99% surety know what they're going to tell me. Therefore, I already know what I'm going to respond. I already know the conversation before I even start the conversation. That's the key to good communication. If you can anticipate what you're going to be told by ATC based on where you are and what your request is, then you've got the communication part licked, okay? So what I tell my students to do is, and this takes a little while, this takes some time, you gotta do this, it takes some time, but here's the tower over here. You guys ever met Carl? You guys know Carl, the tower controller, tower chief? He's a nice guy.
One of my friends' moms actually works for the San Antonio agency.
Oh, cool. So what I do is I tell my students, put yourself in Carl's shoes. Try and pretend you're Carl. What is Carl's job?
Guided traffic.
Carl's job is to get traffic from here on that runway, or traffic on that runway, off that runway, as quickly and efficiently and directly as possible. That's what his job is. His job is, if you're out there and want to land, he wants to get you in and on the ground and pass you on to Mike, who's working the ground control or whatever. All right, or get you up and out as quickly as possible. That's what he wants to do. So if you listen ahead of time to what's going on at the tower and what's happening, you can start to put yourself in the shoes of whoever is controlling that aircraft. And you can begin to think, all right, well, he's trying to be efficient and do things efficiently. What's going to happen when I call him and I throw another wrench into his soup? How's he going to deal with me? What would I do if I'm dealing with all this traffic? When you can begin to do that, you got it figured out. Because most of the time, your answer as to what you would do is exactly what he would do once you understand what they're trying to accomplish. you'll do the same thing, okay? So that's the big key to it. So before you make your call, have some idea of what response you're likely to get. Because if the response you get is different, and I mean way off, then you need to question whether or not communication is taking place. Did he understand what I just asked, or did I say something wrong, right? But if you're not thinking along those lines, if you're not thinking out ahead of it, and you miscommunicate in some fashion, and they repeat something back to you that doesn't really, in the scheme of things, make sense for what you wanted, if you're not thinking about it, you'll just respond to whatever they say, and communication hasn't taken place. One example might be, let's say we're using runway 17 and we're coming in here from the east. Let's say you call for whatever reason, you call out here and they say, and you call for, I hear this a lot. You're out here and you say I'm 8 miles west. And what you're thinking is the airport's west of me. I hear this. Probably the number one problem is you tell them you are on the opposite side that you are. I hear that all the time. Tower 124 Golf X-ray is 8 miles west, landing with Bravo. And they call back and say, report 4 miles west. Well, you didn't hear that. You're thinking, okay, I'm gonna report 4 miles west, but you're really reporting 4 miles east, all right? You call back, hey, I'm 4 miles. And they say, okay, enter the right downwind for runway 17.
Can't go right.
You can't go right. Well, if they say enter the right downwind for 17, you might think, oh, wait a minute. You want me to fly over the top of the runway and enter the right, or excuse me, fly over the top of the runway and enter the right downwind for 17? That doesn't make any sense, does it? So something happens. Some communication errors happen someplace. But if you're not thinking forward enough to know that when I call here, he's going to give me either a left midfield, he's going to give me a left downwind or a left base or something along those lines. If you don't get that, somebody's not communicating. Does that make sense? So you need to get into a position where you can anticipate what should be coming with your communication at a towered airport. Okay? All right. Another thing I see, and that Tower doesn't like at all, and I don't blame them, because what's Tower's job? What do they want to do with you?
Down, pass you out.
They want to get you down on the ground and get you out of their hair as quickly as possible. That's what they want to do. They want to take every airplane that's in their area that they're working, there's a little strip of paper that they have that they're moving around. Ground writes it down, he moves it over to Tower. Tower's doing stuff with it, and they've got things lined up. They want to get those strips out in the garbage. That's what they want. They want them out from in front of them, okay? So let's say that you're using runway 35, okay? And let's say that you're over here someplace. What would you expect them to tell you? How would you expect them to enter the pattern for 35? What do you expect? You make the call. Tower 124 Golf X-ray is 10 miles southeast. That's the other thing. If you're over here, you're not east. You're southeast. This is east. This is northeast. I hear that a lot too. I hear students call from over here. 10 miles east. No. This is 10 miles east. This is 10 miles southeast. There's a difference. This tower does not have a radar. When you call, guess what they do? They get binoculars and they start looking east. And if you're over there, they're not going to see you. So if you say southeast, they're going to look over here. So say where you are, okay? All right. So let's say you call, you say, I'm 10 miles southeast, landing with Bravo. They're using they're using runway 35. So even before you make that call, what do you expect? What leg do you expect to enter on?
Final.
Huh?
By the final?
Maybe, depending on how far. They could have you come over here and just enter the final. They could. What else might they give you?
The base?
Which base?
A right base.
Right base. They might say enter right base for 35. Okay. Well, I see this a lot. Okay, right base for 35. And then people will just turn and do this. That's not the right base. The right base would be going straight to here. And then base. That make sense? So when they tell you to go to a leg, they mean go to a leg. If they say enter the if you're over here, they say enter the midfield downwind for 17. left downwind, it doesn't mean come over here. It means come over there. If you're over here and they say enter the left base for 17, it doesn't mean do this. It means do this. That makes sense? Because doing all of this, they got that piece of paper for too damn long. They don't want that piece of paper. They want to throw it away. They want you to get here, get your wheels on the ground, and get off my runway. That's what they want. So do that. All right, go to the legs. Go where they want you to go. Okay, one more break. Okay, we left off with entry into the pattern at a Towered Airport. Any questions on how to get in and out of the Towered Airport? I didn't talk about getting out. Let's talk about getting out. So it's kind of the opposite. What's that?
You were saying something, you said, I'll talk about that when you get back.
That was on the previous page, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was previous.
Yeah, that was the entering.
Entering the pattern for a Towered Airport. Yep. Okay. So how do we get out of a Towered Airport? It's kind of the opposite of getting in, right? So who are we going to call first? What are we going to listen to first? We're going to listen to ATIS first. Then who are we calling? Ground control. And they're going to give us permission to taxi and direction to taxi out to the active runway. Then we call tower, and tower gets us out and out of the airspace. Okay. I want to talk about other Towered Airports like Bravos and Charlies that we didn't talk about here. So let me draw this diagram up here. So this is departure. This is we're departing an airport. Okay, versus arriving at the airport. All right, so we're departing a delta. So this color will be delta. So we just talked about. The first thing we do is we call ATIS, right? Then we call ground. And then we call tower. That's the order. Everybody's familiar with that order. You get ATIS first, and call ground for directions to taxi, and then tower to get out. Arriving, coming back in here, what do we do?
Tower.
Well, first, ATIS. Okay, then tower. Then maybe ground, it depends. Sometimes the tower has you stay on their frequency, but that would be the natural order right there. Okay. This would be a Delta airport. If it's a Charlie, or if it's a Bravo, or, and we'll talk about this next week, if it's a TRSA, Terminal Radar Service Area. A TRSA is a Delta that has radar services. Okay? So if it's a Delta, just a straight Delta, they have no radar services, then you would not follow this procedure. If it's a TRSA, you would. All right. So the first thing you're going to do on your departure is you're going to get ATIS, just like you normally would, but then you're going to call clearance delivery. Clearance delivery. What you're going to do with clearance delivery is essentially the same thing you do with ground right now. All right? But you're going to be a little more specific. You're not going to say eastbound with information delta or whatever. You're going to say something more like VFR heading 100 at 3,000 feet. So you're going to give them much more specific information. What heading do you want to go? When you take off, what heading do you want to depart on? And what altitude do you want to climb up to? You're going to give them that information. Okay. Clearance delivery then is going to give you a couple of pieces of information. They're going to give you a squawk code. They're going to give you a squawk code. That's what you're going to put in your transponder. Right now, what do we have in our transponder? 1200. What does 1200 mean? It means VFR, right? And we're not necessarily talking to ATC. In fact, we're not talking to ATC. If we have 1200 in our transponder, we are not talking to ATC. But in this case, we would get a transponder code that we would put in our transponder because we want ATC to be able to track us and know who we are. So we're going to get a squawk code, and we're going to get a departure frequency. Clearance delivery is going to give us those two things. A squawk code and a departure frequency. You're going to write those down, and we'll read those back. Okay? And then once we're ready to taxi, then we contact ground. Now we don't have to tell ground anything except ground 124 Golf X-ray, ready to taxi. because they already know everything. Because now, up in that tower, you got a clearance delivery guy who writes down your information on a little strip. Then he hands it to the guy right next to him who's working ground. And then ground hands it off to the guy right next to him who's working tower. So the idea is they want to get that strip in the garbage, right? So they want to get you out and in the garbage. Okay. So then you'll call ground, you'll go to tower. So this is all the same. They'll get you to the runway, you go to tower, they give you your clearance to depart. Now the difference with tower is that as soon as you take off, they're going to have you, they'll just say contact departure. And you switch over to departure frequency, and then you talk to departure. And departure gets you out of the airspace. Okay? So you have 2 additional steps in the process when it's an airport that has radar services. If it's an airport that has radar services, you've got those 2 additional steps. Getting out. Coming in, you're going to start with ATIS. Then you're going to contact approach. Okay? Approach, if you're not already on a squawk frequency, if you haven't been with ATC the whole time, approach will issue a squawk code, which you'll then put in your transponder. 4-digit code you'll put in your transponders. That's how they're tracking you. They're tagging you up on their radar, and they know which blip is you as you come. All right, approach will get you into the area. You will know ahead of time, expect runway 17 or expect this runway or that runway. You'll know what to expect from the tower. As you get, and the tower knows you're coming because approach has already told them you're coming. At some point they'll say contact tower. You contact the tower on the tower frequency, and the tower will say, you know, you're number 2 behind this, or clear to land, or whatever. They're just going to give you the clearance or whatever your further instructions are. And then once you land, you go to ground and you taxi off. So on the arrival, there's only one additional process, and that's approach. Okay? So it's basically the same thing with a couple of different, you've got approach and departure, and you've got clearance delivery going out. Clearance delivery gives you what you need to know to get out. It gives you departure frequency and a squawk code. If you're going to do flight following right out of this airport, how many of you have done flight following out of here, right out of the airport before you even take off? Okay, you can do that here. So if you when you contact ground, you could contact ground and do everything you would normally tell them. And ground will then, at some point, they'll call you back on it. They'll say, okay, go ahead and, you know, taxi to runway whatever, and we'll get back to you with frequencies, right? And departure frequency and squawk code. They then contact San Antonio. San Antonio gives them a departure frequency and a squawk code. Then they relay it to you so that you have it. And then as soon as you take off, tower will say contact departure. And you call departure, and you're already up on their radar. They know who you are.
I just, my mind went kind of blank there for me. You did say you contact ground here and request that information?
Yes.
Okay.
You can do it here on the ground. If you know you're going to want flight following before you take off,
Yes.
just let's say you're going, I don't know, north. You could call, and you would tell them where you want to go. Let's say you're flying to
Georgetown. Say I'm going to
Yeah, say you're going to Georgetown. You call ground and say, ground, 124 Golf X-rays on the ramp over here. I got information Bravo. And I'd like to get, I'm ready to taxi, and I'd like to get flight following to Georgetown. They're going to say, okay, taxi to 35, and we'll get back to you on frequency in just a minute. And while you're taxiing, they're calling San Antonio. And then they'll call back and say, 124 Golf X-ray, squawk code 1234, departure frequencies, whatever it is. You write it down. Put that squawk code in your box. Put that frequency up on the standby side. So as soon as you take off, boom, you move it over. As soon as they say contact departure, move the frequency over. You're on. You call departure and say San Antonio departure, 124 Golf X-ray. X-ray just departed New Braunfels. They're going to say 124 Golf X-ray, radar contact, you know, whatever. 1 mile northeast of New Braunfels. On course approved, or whatever they're going to tell you. Yeah, and then you've got flight following from that point. You got flight following from that point. Okay. All right. So that's how you use the radios getting in and out of towered airports, and whether or not it has approach or not. Again, what I've got in blue, this is going to apply to any Bravo or Charlie airport. They're always going to have radar services, and they're going to have approach and departure controls. If it's a TRSA, Terminal Radar Service Area, that's kind of an other, what we call other airspace. I'm going to get into that in detail next week, but that's an other airspace where it is a Delta airport, but they have radar services, which is unusual. But there are some Deltas that have radar services, and it essentially is a holdover. It's a holdover from airspace that we used to have before the mid-90s when we switched over to the new types of airspaces. Okay?
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
If this airport's closed, would I contact San Antonio?
San Antonio directly for flight
Okay,
following.
Approach or departure? You know, for
To
flight
leave?
following. No, yeah, for flight following to
So,
Georgia.
so the approach departure, you're talking to the same person, whether you call them approaches, whether you're coming in, or departure if you're going out. It's just what you're calling them based
Okay,
on
so
what
if
you're
I
doing.
was going- This airport is at night, and
Yeah.
I'm going to Georgetown.
Yeah, you would call them departure. You'd say San Antonio departure,
Okay.
because that clues them in right away on what it is, what's happening. Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. Let's look at what do we do. Let's go here. So I want to kind of just go over this real quick. I told you it's formulaic in what we do and how we make our calls. Again, the more you do this and the more you anticipate, the better you're going to get at all of this. But essentially, your format, you always have these 5 things, these 4 always when you're making your original call. The 5th one is depending on whether you're flying into a towered airport or a non-towered airport, okay? And the way you make the calls, the things you say might be a little bit different. So as an example, the first, before the slash is a towered operation. After the slash would be non-towered operation.
Would you bring the gentleman out here?
What's
The
that?
guy that.
Oh.
Yeah. I don't know whether he's,
They got into, he's a young kid, he got into an issue with an adult, and he just started going all high school, and I just thought, you need to leave.
I got you.
And he wouldn't leave, so I made him get out there.
yeah, his mom is on his way.
Okay. Okay. All right, so communication-wise, if it's a towered airport, who you're calling, so New Braunfels Tower, who you are, Remos 261 Army Alpha, where you are, in this case 10 Northwest, what do you want? Landing with, information Bravo or Charlie, whatever it is, okay? And what you want, you could say Tower 261 Army Alpha, 10 Northwest, would like to transition your airspace, would like to do touch and goes, would like to circle around a piece of property just northwest of your area, but I'll be in your airspace. Whatever it is, what are your intentions? Just let them know. If you're going to be in there, they need to give you permission to get in there. Okay, so whatever your intentions are, and then with the ATIS. You always need to get that ATIS before you call them and enter the airspace. If it's a non-towered airport, let's say it's Lockhart, it's who you're calling Lockhart traffic. In this case, I used to have a red Cub in the school. Red Cub would be 511 Sierra Mike was the end number. Well, if I'm calling a non-towered airport, what would be more descriptive if you're at that tower? Me telling you I'm 511 Sierra Mike, or me telling you I'm a red Cub? Right? A red Cub. That communicates more to you. So communicate in that fashion, right? All right, so Lockhart traffic, red Cub, 5 southeast, landing or whatever, overflying the field at 2,000 feet, or whatever it is you're trying to communicate. And you're not communicating to a person, you're communicating to anyone that is on that frequency that cares, that's close to that airport. So you need to be very specific about these things: who you are, who you're calling, who you are, where you are, and what are your intentions. If I'm in that pattern at Lockhart doing pattern work, and let's say some traffic call that says Lockhart traffic, red Cub 5 southeast, and then stops. Well, that doesn't tell me anything, except, well, now what do I need to be worried about? Well, okay, what are you doing, 5 southeast maneuvering or whatever. Communicate what it is you're trying to do. Think of the other person. You're trying to tell the other person or people, what are you doing? Why are you there, and what are you doing? All right, and then the last thing you'll say is Lockhart traffic. So you're going to start it with the airport, and you're going to end it with the airport. Notice we say traffic, because who are we talking to? We're talking to whatever traffic is in that area. That's who we're talking to.
In what instances do I give them my altitude?
You could give them your altitude in any of those. You could say Lockhart traffic, Red Cub 5 southeast, 3,000 feet landing, Lockhart, landing, or 3,000 feet descending, Lockhart. You could give them your altitude there. Another place to give them the altitude would be if you're going to overfly. You could say Lockhart traffic, Red Cub 5 southeast, going to overfly the airport to the northwest at 2,500 feet, Lockhart traffic. So that's good, important information. If you're coming into land, you don't necessarily have to give them your altitude because everybody's going to assume that before you get there, you're going to be at traffic pattern altitude. That when you're at least a couple, 2 to 3 miles out, you're going to be at TPA. So you wouldn't necessarily have to, but that information would not hurt if you gave it to them. Wouldn't hurt. All right? All right, now notice that at a towered operation, you start with who you're calling and you end with the ATIS information. At a non-towered airport, you start with who you're calling and you end with who you're calling. And it's really important to do that. It's really important to bookend that information. Here's why. We deal with frequencies, Unicom frequencies at non-towered airports. There's only a handful of them. 122.7, 122.8, 122.9, 123.0, 123.05. There's a handful, half a dozen or so, that are widely used, okay, at non-towered airports. And if you just go up, and for those of you who haven't started doing cross countries yet, if you just go up, if you're out in the practice area and you just tune in 122.8, 122.7, 8, 9, 123.0, you're going to hear all kinds of stuff from everywhere, from all different airports, all over the place. I think Lockhart's 122.8. So if you tune in 122.8, you'll hear people calling traffic calls at Lockhart, traffic calls at this airport, all over the place, okay? Because they share that common frequency. So the reason to bookend this is really important. What you'll begin to understand is when you're flying in or around an airport, as soon as you hear someone call, you'll listen for that immediately. And if it's not the airport you're near, you tune it out. You tune out the rest of it. Okay? But if you don't hear the first part and all you hear is this part, now you're listening for the end. Does that make sense? All right. So if I'm in the pattern, this happens frequently. I mean frequently. Let's say I'm in the pattern at Lockhart. I'm on the left downwind for 18. And I hear something joining the left downwind 18. Where? Are you coming up my tail? Are you coming in? Are you coming down on top of me? Are you coming up from? Where are you at? Now I'm looking all over the place because I have no idea. There's somebody entering the left downwind for 18, and they didn't tell me what airport. Is it where I'm at? Right? So start and end with the airport, so that if they don't hear this one, they'll hear that one. Okay.
I've heard to that referred as an information sandwich.
It's an information sandwich, yeah. That's a way to look at it. But it's really important, and you'll begin to understand that when you start doing non-towered operations at other airports. You're going to begin to understand as you start. You'll learn. Your brain will learn to tune out what you don't need to hear. You'll learn to do that, and when you hear if you don't hear the airport, but you hear. If you don't hear the airport, now you're listening to what you do hear, and you're listening for an airport at the end, so you know what is this? Does this mean anything to me or not? And when that's not there, it's very disruptive. Okay. All right. Radios are not required at non-towered airports. There's no requirement to have an operating two-way radio at a non-towered airport. I said that before. So you want to be really careful. You want to be very cognizant of that and very conscious about the fact that there could be airplanes flying at that airport that either don't have radios or an electrical system. A lot of the airplanes that were built before the 1940s, they don't have an electrical system in them. So they're flying around with handhelds, like your handheld, right?
Kingsbury's got a lot of like remote control traffic too, right?
Kingsbury's got remote control airplanes flying over there, so you got to watch for them.
Really?
Yeah, they have an RC field at the field, so you got to watch out for them. But watch for these other airplanes. They may not have radios. So where are you looking at? You're looking on the You're looking on the 45. You're looking on the downwinds, the departure, looking for other traffic that might be there. Okay. Suppose you have a radio failure. what did you do? Most planes have radios. Most planes now have radios, and if they don't have radios, they're carrying a handheld with them. Most of them are, okay? But it doesn't mean they have to. But what if you have a radio failure? What do you do? Well, don't panic. Okay, don't panic. This I like to tell my students, this is not an emergency. Have we done the emergency? We haven't done the emergency class this rotation yet. This is not an emergency. We'll talk about it in that emergency class. But if it's a VFR day, if it's a day like today and your radio goes out for some reason, that is not an emergency. That isn't even close. That's, mildly inconvenient. But it is nowhere close to an emergency. But you can turn it into an emergency.
Whenever, if I'm not wrong, sometimes on a flight radar, I'll see people squawk 7600. Is that the same?
7600 would be the squawk code if you have radio failure. That'd be 7600.
Is that it?
This is what you would do in this case, yes.
All right, squawk.
If your radio failure wasn't due to a complete electrical failure. If it's a complete electrical failure, your transponder's not going to work.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. But what do you do? First, don't panic. You got a couple of options. You can proceed to a non-towered airport and land, because you don't have to have a radio at a non-towered airport. It's not required. Okay. Or if you're going into a towered airport, if you want to come back into here, you can use NORDO procedures, which I'll go over with you. But some causes of radio failure. Oh, what I was going to say is, it's not an emergency, but this radio failure or radio problem. How many of you have had radio problems? So at any point during your training, you've had radio problems. You're going to have this. Everybody in this room is going to experience not being able to either talk, communicate out, or listen back in on the radio, not just once, but probably multiple times in your flying career. I promise you, okay? I promise you. You can take that to the bank right now. You're going to have some radio issues. And 90% of the time, it's operator error. 90% of the time, you got the radio set up wrong, you got the volume turned down, your headset jack's not plugged in all the way. Something you did is causing it.
Batteries went bad.
Whatever. Something you did is, most of the time, that's what caused it, okay? And so what happens when we turn radio failure on a VFR flight into disaster, it's because you get so distracted with a hangnail that you kill yourself, right? Rather than just flying the airplane and landing. We don't need a radio to fly an airplane. It's not necessary, right? Don't let that kill you. All right, here's some of the reasons, 5 reasons. You could have a transmitter failure, so you can't transmit out. You could have a receiver failure. You could have both of them go out. You could have complete electrical system failure. You could have headset failure. Lots of reasons that you could have failure, right? One thing I would not spend a whole lot of time doing, unless you can carefully do this, and if you've got time, you're at altitude, you got plenty of fuel, no real worries in the world, trim the airplane out or put it on autopilot, and maybe you could do a little troubleshooting, figure out what went on, but I wouldn't spend a lot of time on it because it's just not necessary. Just land, figure it out on the ground, okay? Okay. So, again, we got the 2 options. We could go to an airport that's non-towered and land, or we follow NORDO procedures, and that's the NORDO procedures right there. So you're going to get light gun signals from the tower. Okay. How many of you have a knee board that you purchased from me? Okay, do you have it with you?
I didn't purchase it from you, but I got my own.
Okay, well, if you purchased it from me, it has these on it, printed on the knee board.
And the one that I have has
Okay,
it's
all right.
converting.
All right, so if you have that knee board and you happen to have if you happen to need to go in to get to a towered airport and use light gun signals, you have it right there on your knee board. But essentially, here's what's going to happen. And I've personally done this 3 or 4 times at towered airports because I had some issues with radios in an airplane. Usually what will happen, if it's just a radio problem, squawk 7600. If you put 7600 in your transponder, then what will happen is whatever radar facility is near you, is around you, you're going to pop up on that radar. You're going to flash 7600, 7600, okay? If the airport you're at has radar, then obviously they know, that you're there. If it's this airport, they don't have radar. So what will happen is if someone from San Antonio sees you flashing 7600 and you're heading in this direction, they're going to call Carl in the tower and say, hey, you got a Nordo coming your way.
Oh, wow.
And he's coming from this direction, and Carl's going to get his binoculars out and start looking for you, and he's going to have his light gun signal in his hand flashing green towards you, flashing green, which
Can you
is,
see that in the daytime?
yes, you can. It can be difficult, but you can. We went out on the deck one time and had him do it. It was hard to see, but you can, depending on how the light's coming. Closer you get, the easier it is to see. But you'll see flashing green, and that just means keep on coming, getting the pattern and land. When you see steady green, that means you've got your clearance to land. Okay. So if you're able to, if they know you're coming because you squawk 7600, they're going to know you're coming. Then you can expect to see the flashing lights as you're approaching. If you had a complete electrical system failure, they don't know you're coming. Okay. Well, now what are you going to do? Well, what you're going to do is you're going to fly over the top of the tower, over the top of the airport, out of the airspace if you can get out of the airspace, and just circle the tower. Just start circling the tower far enough away where you can see the tower cab, and keep your eye on the tower cab. Sooner or later, those guys in the tower are going to be like, what's that idiot doing circling around up there? And they'll probably figure out, well, maybe he's lost his radios, and they'll clear everybody out of the way, and they'll start flashing the green light at you. When you see that flashing green, that means, all right, come on back here, get in, get ready for the clearance to land. They're saying, come on in and get ready for the clearance. And then at some point, you'll get the steady green. Now, if you're in a situation, you can't always be in sight of the tower. As an example, let's say you want to land on 17, and you're on the left downwind for 17. Well, you can't see the tower. You got the flashing green, but you lost the tower. Well, do your pattern like you normally would. Watch for other traffic, get turned on base, check the tower, see if you got a steady green. Maybe you still have a flashing green, just keep on going. When you get final, check the tower. At some point, you're going to get a steady green, and you've got your clearance to land. Does that make sense? All right. So
So if you don't get that steady green, just stay.
Keep circling.
Stay in TPA and.
Yep. Yep.
So just fly right over the.
Yep.
So you fly over the runway?
You could just, if you're just getting steady greens, flashing greens, just do a downwind, a base, just stay up and fly over the runway, crosswind, downwind, just keep doing that until you get that steady green. If you're on final and you don't have a steady green yet, go around, don't land until you get that steady green. Okay? Yes?
I've also reminded myself, I've seen this a couple of times when I've been like looking at like stuff online, and in my head, I always told myself, if you see Christmas lights, it's not good.
If you see, well, that's it's alternating red and green.
Christmas, it's good.
All right.
If you see Christmas and it's April, it's not good.
All right. The other thing you can do is, here's what's going to happen the first time it happens to you. Here's what you'll do. I promise you. You're just going to go find a non-towered airport and land, and you're going to call me if you're renting one of my planes. That's perfectly okay. All right. Or call Sebastian, preferably. Call Sebastian. Let him deal with it. That's what I pay him for. Don't call me unless you want to go have a beer or something. All right. I'm just kidding. You can call me. But this will happen, okay? This is going to happen to you. Just so when it does, remember this conversation right here. Oh, yeah, you said this would happen. Okay, so here it is. And make sure I got my headset plugs in. Do I have the volume? Am I on the right frequency? Is the volume turned up? Right? Usually that's what it is. The volume's turned down. So you're transmitting, and the tower's calling you back, and you're not responding because you don't hear them calling you back. And they're trying to call you, and then the radio's just turned down. The volume's all the way down, right? So try and troubleshoot if you can. If you can't, I mean, don't spend a lot of time doing it. Just go land someplace and call us. All right. All right. The other thing you could do, I've done this before, is land. I had a situation where I had a little smoke in the cockpit. I had some smoke come up from under the instrument panel, so I shut the master switch off. And I landed at an airport about 15 miles away from the towered airport I wanted to go to, and I called them on the phone. I said, I had an electrical issue, and I don't want to, and I got on the ground, I turned the master back on, I saw the sparking, so I shut it back off. I turned it on long enough to start it, then I shut it back off. I called them, said, I'll be coming, and so they were, as I'm coming, they saw me, and they had the light flashing. So you could do that too. Just call them ahead of time and say, here's my situation, I'm coming from here, and I'll be leaving at this time.
The
Okay?
engine doesn't stop when you turn off the master.
Engine does not stop when you turn off the master switch, no. No, because it's a separate system. They have a magneto system for the ignition. Okay, any questions on that? All right, so just be ready. At some point, you're going to screw up the radios. I promise you. And you'll do it more than once. I promise you.
Don't like the Christmas lights.
Don't, right. Okay, let's talk about wake turbulence for for airport operations. When you're at a towered airport, you'll at this airport, at any towered airport, you will frequently hear this. You're number 2 behind the citation, caution wake turbulence, clear to land, or something like that. If you hear that caution wake turbulence, what they're basically saying is, all right, the monkey's off my back. I've told you about it. Now it's your responsibility to be careful for the wake turbulence. But whether they say that or not, you need to recognize that wake turbulence is, we've got these little tornadoes coming off the ends of these wingtips. And the heavier the airplane, the more violent that rotation is, that tornado is, and the more it can flip you upside down, right? So when is wake turbulence at its greatest? Who remembers from the aerodynamics class?
When the airplane that produces them is heavy, clean, and slow.
And when does that happen?
Takeoff.
Takeoff. That's when it's, and heavy, clean, and slow, okay? Now, you also get it on landing, okay? But it's worse on takeoff. The reason that what is this? What's happening here?
They're going over the other side of the lane.
It's the downwash from the top, the way,
Mm-hmm.
bottom colliding.
Yeah, so it's the wingtip vortice, wake turbulence. It's also induced drag. What we're looking at is the induced drag right there, right? So if this airplane weighs 500,000 pounds, let's say that airplane weighs 500,000 pounds. How much lift does it have to generate? 500,000 pounds. So if that airplane's flying, pretend this weighs 500,000 pounds. If it's flying like this at 250 knots, how much lift is it generating? 500,000 pounds. If it's flying like this at 100 knots, how much lift is it generating? 500,000 pounds. What's different is the pressure distribution. Here, there's a much less of a difference in pressure, so there's a tinier spiral. Here, there's a huge pressure distribution and we get a giant turbulent wake. So when we're slow and heavy, we're going to generate the most wake, which is going to be takeoff and landing. Okay. All right, so what does wake do?
They need to talk to you, the officer.
You want to talk about wake turbulence real quick then? Here.
Swapping in.
Swap.
All right, wake turbulence. So wake turbulence is just a safety thing. It's a huge, huge safety risk involved with airport operations. All right, so let's go back to aerodynamics. Okay, what are the 2 different types of drag that are caused from the airplane? Parasitic, induced. All right, yeah, just call it out. No need to raise hands. All right, so parasitic and induced. Right. So quick review. Parasitic drag is just the fact of an object moving through air. Right. But induced drag is the fact that anytime we create lift, right there, that equation that Dave loves to point to, and now I'm pointing to it. Right. That anytime we make more lift, we make more drag. All right. An easy way to say that, or an easy way to like to remember induced drag, it's a tax on lift. All right, so the more lift you generate, the more drag you're going to generate, and that's induced drag. Okay, so how is induced drag seen? How is it produced? Well, it's produced in the vortices. Okay, so wingtip vortices from the wingtips trail behind an aircraft. Now, like I said, if you make more lift, you make more drag, or AKA, in terms of induced drag, you're gonna make more wingtip vortices, okay? So let's compare a Remos, right, one of our planes, to a big freighter, airliner, jet, right? Right, exactly, right? More, the bigger the airplane, the heavier the airplane, based on the configuration, right, with the flaps down, right, that's going to produce more induced drag or more vortex generation, okay? Now, we call it just wake turbulence, all right? This is just like if you've ever gone boating, right? Anytime you go boating, you produce a wake, right? It's the same format for an airplane, okay? But the cause of it is from that induced drag, okay? So anytime you're dealing with wake turbulence, you never want to be, to avoid the wake turbulence, you never want to be at or below the altitude of the airplane, right? And downward in a way, okay? So anytime you deal with an airplane, anytime the vortex generation is down and away from the airplane, you want to avoid that. That is, we call it dirty air, okay? So if you ever do like a steep turn, okay, in an airplane, right? If you do a good enough steep turn, right, you will likely hit your own wake turbulence because you essentially do your own and you hit your own wake turbulence, okay? Now, if we were to do that behind a jet in our itty bitty little airplane that barely weighs 1,300 pounds, right? You think that's a good story? You think that's gonna end well? No, okay? Right? Think about it this way. If this jet weighs, I don't know, ballparking, let's just say 100,000 pounds, right? That means it needs to produce 100,000 pounds of lift, right? And now just think about the amount of drag, the amount of force being generated from these, from the wingtip vortices, okay? That is very serious. We want to avoid them, all right? So just big picture, there's going to be a few scenarios in the slides, okay? Big picture, you always want to, how is it working here? Big picture, you want to avoid being below and behind an aircraft, okay? So one instance is, and you can see here, if you have an airplane taking off, right? During its roll, right, if it starts here from a stop, goes full power, it's starting to accelerate. Wingtip vortices aren't being generated until lift is greater than weight and it starts lifting off the ground, okay? So at this point, wingtip vortices are being generated. So in our small airplane, do you think we want to be taking off through this? No, absolutely not. Or do you think we're going to want to land through that? No, absolutely, right? So anytime you are dealing with an aircraft that is especially larger than you, so like any of the private jets that go in and out of New Braunfels, right? You want to basically identify their flight path the best you can, right? So if we're talking about takeoff, right? They're more than likely going to take a longer time or more of the runway, right? But how's their performance climbing? Is it going to be better or worse than our Remos? Way better, right? They're doing 3,000 feet a minute easily, right? Initially on takeoff, right? So even though it's going to be spaced apart, at some point in our little Remos, we're going to catch up to it, right? So what are some options we can do to avoid that, right? Because we don't want to avoid that, right? Even when we're over the runway, it's not like we're 2,000 feet in the air. In the event we do hit the wake turbulence, we don't want to be at 500 feet. So what are some options to try and avoid it on takeoff? Say that again.
Wait a little longer to take off.
Wait. Right? Just like a boat wake, right? If you wait a little bit, it dissipates, it goes away, right? What do you got?
Turn before you hit it.
Turn before you hit it, right? Now, the risk with that is, again, yeah, possibly traffic, but also you have your standard traffic procedures, which you guys have talked about already, right? So you don't want to turn too early for traffic, right? But also it's a risk thing. You're deviating away from the runway and possibly putting yourself in an area where in the event of an engine out, might not be the best option than going straight ahead, right? So absolutely, first option, I would definitely wait, right? Especially when you're taking off. There's no need to wait, right? There's no rush to take off, right? I always say takeoffs are optional, landings are mandatory, okay? All right, takeoffs are always optional, landings are mandatory, all right? So when it comes to takeoff, right, wait, just wait it out, okay? All right, let's talk about landing though, right? Generally, aircraft are landing at the 1,000 footers, okay? These are the white blocks that are 1,000 feet down the beginning of the runway, okay? Those 1,000-foot blocks, they're big, solid white blocks on either side of this, the center line, are essentially the main aiming points for an aircraft, for a jet specifically. Okay. Now, if a jet is slightly faster, heavier, they might need the whole entire runway, so they might aim here. Okay. But generally, a good rule of thumb is any high-performance aircraft jet is aiming for the 1,000 footers. Okay. So when an aircraft lands, a little bit after the 1,000 footers, the wingtip vortices are going to dissipate. The wake turbulence is going to dissipate, and there's not going to be any. Right. So when we're landing, do we want to aim at the numbers?
No.
to touch down? No, right? Again, you always want to avoid being below and behind an aircraft, right? So in this case, you know where the 1,000 footers are, right? It's not like you have to imagine the aircraft landing and you see the 1,000 footers, right? So aim past the 1,000 footers, be above that path, okay? Again, just, it's kind of opposite for takeoff. Jets have a very steep gradient for climbing, right? However, but us is very shallow because of our performance. It kind of flip-flops for the approach though. Jets have a very shallow approach. It's actually a 3-degree angle towards the ground. In our aircraft, for those of you flying, right, it's a very steep angle, right? I remember Lucy and I were flying, and it was our first time doing a descent angle, and it's kind of nerve-wracking when you're doing it at first because it is a very steep angle, right? So that is actually a very good advantage for wake turbulence, because that allows us to stay way up here and have a steeper bank angle and aim past where they touch down. Okay. Now I'm not saying you always want to just automatically think the 1,000 footers, right? Like I said, sometimes we'll get some big Gulfstream aircraft flying in, like during the Formula race a few weeks ago, we had a ton of Gulfstream aircraft. And I can tell you, they're very fast and heavy, and they need a lot of runway. And New Braunfels doesn't have that large of runway, so they were nearly landing at the beginning of the runway, right? So that's something to note, right? Other times, you might have a slightly larger twin. For those of you a few doors down, there's the air ambulance, right? It's a single engine, but it's still heavy, it's still bigger. We still want to practice wake turbulence, right? But they sometimes land halfway down the runway. Why? Because they don't need to land at the beginning of the runway just to taxi a lot further down, right? So again, general rule of 1,000 footers, but you always want to pay attention. You always want to look and make a self-note, especially when you're dealing with wake turbulence. Have you guys talked about like controlled tower radio calls and all that yet? Okay, it is technically mandatory for air traffic controllers to give wake turbulence advisories if they give you clearance behind a larger aircraft than you. Now, this doesn't mean, technically a Remos is slightly smaller than a 172, right? But they're not gonna give you wake turbulence for that, unfortunately, okay? But if it's a larger jet that takes off and then you're landing behind it, they are essentially required. I'm not gonna say all the time they're gonna do it, because sometimes they can get busy and they forget, or they're training so they forget, but it is required for them to say, caution wake turbulence, okay? What's it? Yeah, so just an example for takeoff or landing clearance, it would say, clear to land 17 or clear for takeoff 17, caution wake turbulence from X aircraft. Okay, does that make sense, right? Now, as a readback, right, what's a required readback? Okay, right, any type of clearance, okay? And caution wake turbulence. Okay, they want you to acknowledge the fact that there is wake turbulence, because this is a huge safety issue. Okay, there are plenty of videos. For instance, does everyone know or generally know what a Black Hawk helicopter is? It's one of the Army's, UH-60, right? It's a larger twin. I think it weighs, you probably know better than me, I think it weighs like 6 tons fully loaded. It's pretty heavy. Okay, and helicopters actually produce the same exact wake as an airplane. So if I'm going back, when a helicopter is in motion, it produces the same wake turbulence. Okay, right, and rotor wash, the downward wash, right? Again, down and away, right? If you're below and away from the aircraft, you want to stay caution, right? So there's a video of a Black Hawk helicopter taking off, and then one of the Airlife aircraft, the larger single engine aircraft that they have, went through their rotor wash and wake turbulence, and they damn near lost control on takeoff at like 100 feet. Okay, so maybe I'll pull up the video afterwards. But that's how serious, even a helicopter on a larger aircraft like that, that's how serious that is. And that's something you definitely want to pay attention to, especially when you're in the traffic pattern. Okay, any questions with wake turbulence? All right. So generally, when we're flying around other larger jet traffic, where should we avoid their flight path? How should we avoid their flight path? Where should we not fly? based on their flight plan, right? Behind and below, okay? Excellent, okay? All right, cool. What do we got next? Collision avoidance. Okay, the biggest, one of the biggest another safety concern with airport operations is a runway incursion. Okay, it is a type, it is essentially anything that is not cleared in the runway environment is a runway incursion. Okay, this can be a dog, a cat, deer like we had yesterday. Okay, right, a coyote. It can be like the airport vehicles have their trucks, right? If they were not cleared into the runway environment, that would be a runway incursion, and of course an aircraft, okay? Now, the number one way I like to say to avoid runway incursions is collision avoidance, right? Looking out, not having your eyes inside the aircraft, rather outside, okay? For those of you doing the flight level questions, in flight level 1 reading questions, right? One of the questions is how much time do you spend, or percentage-wise, how much time should you spend looking outside? Right, and who knows the answer? Just let it out, right? 90%, all right? And during that 90%, what are we doing? Well, we're looking outside, right? We're looking and having collision avoidance, right? Here's the FAA textbook definition of a runway incursion, all right? Like I said, it can be anything, aircraft, vehicle, person, or object that enters a runway environment while it's being used, I guess. Okay, there's different levels of runway incursion. For instance, if no one is landing or taking off on a runway and something accidentally goes onto the runway, like an aircraft crosses the hold short lines that you guys talked about, right? That would be like a low grade because there wasn't any huge safety concern, right? Now, obviously, you don't want to do that, okay? But there wasn't a large risk. But what if an aircraft crossed the hold short line and started laying up the runway while an airplane was on final approach? Do you think that's a huge risk?
Very.
Right, very huge risk, right? So that would be a huge concern when it comes to a runway incursion. So how do you avoid runway incursion? Okay. Read back all runway crossing and hold shorts, okay? Now, I also like to add to this, when you're reading back, right, you want to read back what you wrote down, right? You generally, when you're flying, you want to have a knee board, and we have those easy radio call sheets that we have you fill out, right? Its whole purpose is for you to write down any sort of clearance you get, okay? Even if you have a scratch pad of paper, right? That anytime you get a clearance, you want to write that down, and you want to read that back, okay? Because guess what? We can't rewind on the videotapes while we're flying, right? The only way we can verify what the controller said is based on what we wrote down, right? So we don't want to write down cross runway 13, right? When really they told us to hold short, right? But you look down and it said, oh, I wrote down cross 13, so I'm going to cross 13. Okay, so that is something you want to read back all runway crossings and hold short instructions when you are based on what you're writing down in the cockpit. All right, review the airport layouts, part of your pre-flight planning, and especially before entering the airport environment, right? Whether that's here in the classroom before you leave and you depart, right? Or when that's coming back in from the practice area or from across country, right? During that sort of descent phase, you want to review. All right, here's the runway we're using. This is where we need a taxi. Here's what we can expect, right? And going from there, right? Now, you also want to have that airport diagram out and available to you, okay? One thing, ForeFlight is a common tool. One of the huge collision avoidance that they implement on their app is the fact that it will sense when you land, right? And it will automatically pull up the airport diagram. Okay, that way it's all the way automatically up there, right? Now, if you don't have ForeFlight, which is totally okay, right? Have that taxi diagram, right? That radio call sheet that we have waiting for you guys to grab before every flight. On the back of it is a taxi diagram. Have that out. That's your map, okay? All right, know your airport signage. That's why Dave spent an hour teaching you all the airport signage, right? You need to know the airport signage, right? That way you know what all the markings and whatnot. Review NOTAMs for information, runway taxi closures, and construction areas, right? NOTAMs, have you discussed NOTAMs at all today?
Other than notice
Okay.
airmen, yeah.
Okay.
Only in the sense of how they affect the airport.
Okay, yeah. So NOTAMs are essentially just large enunciations for every pilot to know about concerning an airport, the environment, you know, anywhere. Okay. So you want to review any NOTAMs because guess what? Maybe a taxiway is closed because there's a big hole in it. Well, you don't want to go down that taxiway, hopefully, right? I know I'm getting short on time. We want to request progressive taxi instructions when you sure. Progressive taxi instructions is literally having the controllers step by step guide you through your taxi clearance, all the way through each taxiway. So I like to think of it, it's kind of like, you know, the controllers are holding their arm out, they're saying, follow me, okay? Right, when getting you to where that is. This is huge, especially if you're going to a new airport, a busy airport. Okay, I ferried an aircraft across into North Carolina once, and I had to fly into a Delta as my final destination, actually a Charlie as my final destination. It was very busy. There was American Airlines, United aircraft everywhere, and I was just like, yeah, progressive taxi, right? I know better because the last thing I want to do is screw something up and cause let alone a runway incursion, okay? Track every traffic before crossing a runway and hold line before entering a taxiway or crossing a runway, okay? You want clear, right? Just like you pull up to a stop sign, right, in your car, you look both ways, right? You want clear yourself, not just pull up to a stop sign and then go, right? So same thing with a runway. Turn the aircraft lights and rotating beacon, right? I like to say, turn on the Christmas tree lights. Make the airplane look like a Christmas tree. Be more visible, especially in low visibility conditions, right? We're getting into that phase, especially during the fall and spring here in Texas, right? We get low visibility, we get haze, right? So turning on the lights helps tremendously, especially within the airport environment. All right, when landing, clear the active runway as soon as possible and wait for taxi instructions before further movement. As in, you don't want to land on the runway and then your taxiway is another 2,000 feet down the runway and you don't want to do a brisk walk down the runway, okay? Right? Why? We want to expedite, right? What if there's an aircraft a mile behind us, right? So that can cause a runway incursion, as well as when you pull off the taxiway, make sure you have a clearance before moving. You don't want to start moving down the taxiway without having a clearance, okay? Study and use all proper phraseology in order to understand and respond to ground control instructions, okay? We have the phonetic alphabet for that exact reason, and using the numbers and using, instead of saying 3, you want to say tree, okay? That way it's more concise and clear when you're communicating.
Niner.
Right, niner, right, 5. Okay, and then write down a complex taxi instructions, especially at unfamiliar airports. Kind of tying this back up to the first one, right? When you're getting any type of instruction, let alone taxi instruction, really any instruction you're getting, you especially want to write that down, especially when it's complex. That way, if you need to verify, you have it written down. You can always ask the controllers. Okay. All right, cool. So this is, I know we're kind of getting short on time, but runway incursions. In the end of the day. Right? Runway incursions are another huge safety risk, right? The best way you can do it is slow down, right? That I found, especially instructing and sometimes busier airports like New Braunfels can. Just take your time, right? Don't care about holding other people up, especially when it comes to safety, okay? All right, cool. All right. That's right there for airport operations from a cameo of me for the last few minutes, right? Next week is airspace, okay? I think PHAC, what PHAC would that? Chapter 15. Chapter 15, the PHAC, and then on the gold seal, I forget which section it is on the gold seal, but it's clearly defined. I feel like there's like 6 videos on airspace, all right? So review those.
On the